But
Wow.
so I'm just going to set my timer here so I can keep an eye on things. And I'm going to start the recording on my end here. There we go. Start broadcast. Is that what, did you just say that? It sounded like my voice.
No, that was you.
Oh, I'm just going to set my timer here so I can keep an eye on things. Whoops. Did you hear? Was that me? I was playing the. Did you hear that audio of me talking through there?
Yeah.
Weird.
That was weird.
Okay, so this is the fake future. I'm your host, Lance Robot Son. I'm the fake futurist, and I'm joined here today by my friend and fellow future aficionado. Is that how you say that? Zaq Moser. Moser. You throw in an extra H there sometimes to throw us off. And so Zaq he's my buddy. I found him on the internet. You know, we were both futurist weirdo guys doing stuff on Twitter, and I very much enjoyed what you had to say on the internet. So I kind of hunted you down when you were in Portland. You're still living in Portland now, but I went out there and we became friends a little bit. And so I was telling you over the last kind of year or so that I wanted to do a podcast where I talked about futurism, and I told you my concept about the fake future and how I was going to be the fake future. And I realized recently you were always kind of there encouraging me, nudging me along.
I think
you would ask me, why aren't you the fake futurist yet? Like, why haven't you updated your Twitter bio? And so I know we were talking about this earlier about how we both.
What is a fake future anyway?
That's what everybody always asks me when I tell them about this concept of the fake future. And so I guess let me just explain myself here. The fake future is my concept that I wanted to satirize futurism a little bit and kind of be able to take an irreverent look at it and be critical of the claims that are being made within futurist discourses, because I think that the techno-utopian, techno-optimism kind of thing was really pervasive when I was growing up. Had Wired magazine and stuff in the 90s. I was coming of age. I got the internet in my home, and I was sort of sucked into these utopian dreams of technological progress. But as we've seen it play out after the turn of the century, you know, maybe some of us who had a lot of hopes for technology are starting to kind of have more reservations about it, maybe. Do you have those kinds of reservations about futurism at all?
I'm Zaq Moser, as Lance already said. Lance the fake futurist.
Yeah, introduce yourself.
I don't. I'm trying to think if there's a clever thing I could be called. Maybe I could be the iridescent futurist. Yeah, I think that works.
Okay, so we're joined with the iridescent futurist.
He's part of the fake future, which means he doesn't exist today. And so, no, I don't know. I was actually we were talking about this earlier a little bit, and I was trying to get like a grip on why I became a futurist, if anything, or a transhumanist. Why I initially got into transhumanism, and I think part of it, if we want to go down really far back, is that I have always been kind of a geek. I remember like using Commodore 64s whenever I was like 5, and like going to the public library because there's no way we could afford to own our own Apple IIe at that time, and like learning to program BASIC on the back of like 5 1/4 floppy disk, and then the librarians freaking out because they're like, no, you're going to run the programs. I'm like, no, back and front are different, and they didn't get it because I'm a 5-year-old, you know.
So you were a technophile from an early age.
Yeah, But I mean, like, there was a lot of benefits that came out of it for me. I grew up in a small redneck town with people I couldn't connect with and that didn't understand me, and I was kind of a weird type of dude.
Right.
And we had like a small public library with like a few thousand books, and being able to have access to the internet at, I mean, for me, it was when I was like 16, 14 to 16, like 1996, 1992 to 1996 on like 1400 baud modems, or
Yeah.
even lower, like 2400 baud.
Right.
But having access to other people like me and information outside of like what was in my small town was utopian to me.
Absolutely.
Um, so So I think that's where it started, and then I don't know when I initially got into transhumanism. I think it had to do with probably me listening to Robert Anton Wilson and his ideas about the end theological end goal of humanity, or sentient beings being beings of light that were like transmitted across the galaxy, and we lived as light beings or something like that at the end game. And I was like, yeah, that sounds kind of awesome.
Right. Kind of like sort of the Terence McKenna kind of.
Yeah, Terence McKenna kind of got me with the novelty theory a little bit too, even though I've always had some reservations about Terence McKenna's, the rigor of his thought.
Yes.
But
You have to kind of be a crackpot a little bit to be and have a science fictional sensibility and a futuristic kind of inclination.
Totally. So I think, I don't know, I can't pinpoint, but I was definitely into that sort of stuff. And I think that's where I got into transhumanism, like I said, and futurism and whatnot. And like recently, my eyes have been more on. So I haven't necessarily become cynical or pessimistic, but it's been more directed. I became less of a determinist. I think I used to be a techno-determinist.
Right.
First, actually, in a pessimistic way, thinking like, because I think we're growing up also with Frankenstein stories where,
yeah, and the fear of the bomb.
Technology is going to be
like
bad. Everything, it will destroy everything.
Yeah.
And then I kind of became an optimist, and I was like, actually, I'm not a determinist. I think that technology isn't all that matters. It's we use technologies in particular ways, and we shape how technology is going to turn out. So I became more of a, I guess, an activist, a techno activist towards social justice and environmental type of concerns. That was kind of long, but
no, that's great. I feel very similarly myself about my experience with growing up with the internet and being kind of growing up in a small Midwestern town for me, and I didn't have as many people around me who necessarily shared kind of my interests, but getting the internet at home, getting dial-up internet in high school, yeah, it opened my mind up to a whole new kind. I started investigating alternate political philosophies and takes on human relationships and sort of views of history and things that I weren't getting as much of in school necessarily. So I always had this since then have had a lingering sense that my own self-directed internet-based researching and stuff was sort of more useful to me in a lot of ways after I learned how to read and write and do math a little bit and stuff, and got some basic life sciences and things like that in school. And then after that, you get the internet and you start learning about the broader world, and that can be very empowering to someone who doesn't necessarily have a lot of community around them, right?
They have those resources either. Yeah, like I used to, like, I ran a bulletin board system back in the day before the internet was the internet, and it turned me into an atheist. Because I grew up in a super Christian town, I never been exposed to that. And then like these atheist folks started talking to me, and they converted me. I'm not an atheist anymore, by the way, but at that time, those were just ideas that were never exposed to me.
Yeah, exposure to new ideas.
Is that part of the idealism and the optimism and the feeling that I was kind of living in a utopia, or having access to utopian sort of resources. I think it had to do with the elitism of the internet at that time. The only people that were on the internet were geeks that could figure out how to set this thing up and then like these like obscure codes to get their modems working and connecting in with other people and stuff. And as the internet became more mass
Mainstream.
available, in a lot of ways it's good, but it became a lot more distracting, and it became a lot more, well, the only things on the internet now aren't interesting things. There's a lot of boring things now as
Right.
well. So
There's sort of a higher noise to
yeah,
signal
a lot of
ratio there.
noise now.
But when you first started out, it's kind of there was a self-selecting nature to it that it favored people who were already inclined to take an interest in technology and
Yeah,
maybe think a certain kind of way in regards to that. That it's a good thing, and so that kind of colored a lot of the
yeah,
earlier
yeah,
optimism of online communities, I think. And not
yeah,
to say that we shouldn't have optimism or that we shouldn't even, I think it is good to be desirous of utopian situations, even understanding that, I mean, even kind of ideas of, in the Enlightenment and the Western civilization and stuff has utopian goals as part of its whole appeal.
yeah, totally.
It becomes necessary to recognize that you are always striving towards those things, even if you're not necessarily reaching them. And I think
Right.
clearly there's a lot of room for criticism of, the given status quo
Yeah,
situation politically and socially and these kinds of things. But, I wanted to take an interest in this futurism thing specifically because, I feel like techno culture is becoming more and more prevalent in
hmm,
society, and these ideas of transhumanism are starting to bleed into mainstream science fiction action movies and stuff like that, right? So as these ideas,
do you want to let people know what transhumanism is?
yeah, if you're not already really familiar with it, it's kind of this ideology, or it's sort of a loose philosophy, and lots of different people can have different political persuasions that are maybe drawn to transhumanism. But it's kind of this ideology that we will use science and technology to extend humanity beyond its biological limitations. So maybe we can live longer than we would biologically be able to, or upgrade our intelligence, become smarter, or be able to be physically capable of things that we can't do now. And some transhumanist people online, they argue about this stuff, and they've basically, some people have claimed, virtually anyone who's interested in science, or even like shamans of pre-scientific societies and stuff, as like precursors to transhumanism or
Mm.
something, like that they've retroactively claimed all these figures in history as anticipating transhumanism. But transhumanism is a specific facet, I think, of futurism. That's
Yeah.
because futurism as a kind of a thing has been around, started to get codified in the post-war period with
Hmm.
war gaming and trying to, mutually assured destruction using computers and
Right.
models to try to figure out, what could happen. And that became very important because the stakes were so high. So, but now it's become more accepted by, businesses and governments and stuff. And so there are think tanks out there that are funded by particular interests who are promoting a certain kind of vision of the future that we could go toward by modifying social policy and giving certain incentives in the private sector and so on. And I just don't think that we should leave the future to futurists. It's like the
Right.
future is too important to be left to the futurists. So I feel like people who are interested in maybe an alternative vision of the future that doesn't rely so heavily on maybe the most excessive variants of capitalist development and the excesses of capitalism, your wealth accumulation and exploitative, labor kind of problems and ecological destruction and so on.
Yeah, like what I would call is a future big enough for us all. And even
Yeah,
if
I like that.
even if like people are putting forth various visions or stories or narratives about the future, and they might be coming out of like capitalist camps or any camp um, that have power to put out large narratives. The I still think that the future is ours, whether we like it or not. We all have to live in it.
Yeah.
And so having some conversations about those what we want and what we think about the various narratives that are shaping where we're going, I think is important. So from my understanding, part of like doing this podcast is to kind of bring some ideas about that are being put forth for people to talk about, for everyday folk to talk about.
Absolutely, and we kind of found each other in maybe a transhumanist milieu, or however you say that. But I wanted to do this as a way of, a fancy 10-penny word. I wanted to do this podcast as a way to kind of engage the broader community of people who are interested in technology and interested in all kinds of things, really. But there's I feel that the futurist and transhumanist worlds are very insular, and mostly talking to themselves. So I wanted to create this as a way of.
Real quick?
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you think that the futurist worlds and transhumanist worlds are insular unto themselves, or do you think that do you think it's the same group of folk, or do you think there's a futurist camp and a transhumanist camp, and then there's overlap, or?
Yeah, there's overlap, I think. Yeah. I think that transhumanists are by and large futurists, but not all futurists are really into transhumanism. Or you can be a futurist and totally think that transhumanism is just a lark or some kind of far off or far out kind of
science fiction thinking.
Yeah. But you can still be concerned about, well, what's going to happen in the near future. Like, obviously, people who, sociographers and demographers and so on have to make futurological kind of predictions and stuff when they're making models, for governments need foresight and so on. So I think that you can engage with, so I wanted to kind of engage with futurism more broadly and not just focus on transhumanism, which I think a lot of people within transhumanism are sort of feeling that way more so now as well, that transhumanism needs to be more broad-based and not so much just for early adopters and so on. And I kind of feel like an early adopter myself, but I, of course, of limited means. I adopt as technology as early as I can afford to.
Yeah, totally. That's another thing that's shifted in me over the years. Is I was at first a very early adopter, but now that my interests have changed in life, I've found that to be an earlier adopter requires a lot of cognitive overhead.
Yeah, cognitive load.
It pulls away from other interests I have. So now I'm more like a medium adopter. I want to see what's worked for the early adopters and take that on and whatnot.
Yeah, you don't ever want to have to buy a first generation, say for instance, like a first generation Apple product or whatever.
Or even use a first generation social network or a first generation app. Or I want to go through a few iterations and see this actually works, and then find out what works, and then use their product then. Except the very narrow fields that I am interested in, and then I guess I'm still an early adopter in those fields, but I'm not a broad early adopter.
Right. You've kind of narrowed your focus more now. So
yeah.
I know you haven't actually updated your Twitter bio in a while, and it still says you're a transhumanist, and I think you say you're a techno shaman in there. I used to call myself a delusional cyber shaman before I changed my name to or my bio to a fake futurist. So,
yeah, I need to change my Twitter bio. I was I don't know. It doesn't matter. That's probably way off topic.
Well, I think we have been sort of we've been going here for about almost 20 minutes now on the intro part of it. So I think that's pretty good. I wanted to kind of move along to the main broad subject that I wanted to talk about in this episode of The Fake Future. My idea about The Fake Future was that I would do it as a series with an new episode every month, and I would have these large subheading topics for each episode, And so I was thinking the first episode that I wanted to do, I wanted to tackle some of the most grand claims, the most controversial subjects or whatever, right? Like what's the most, what's the craziest thing that these futurists are promising us as human beings in this world? And I thought that the issue of immortality was the one that seemed the most, most relevant to me, even though now it's, I feel like as I actually spent a lot of time researching it, and the more I was researching it, to prepare for this, I I kind of got kind of bored with it because it's not really something that there's new exciting news about it every day. And I think, just to sort of summarize a lot of the research I did go through, I feel like there's not a very strong likelihood that we will see radical life extension really play out in a big way within any time in the near future of the next 20, 30 years or something. Would be the earliest maybe before we start really seeing widespread effects of life extension. But even that said, I still wanted to lead with this. This is how I planned it, So we're going to talk about immortality, even if we don't have a lot to say about it. I'm a generalist, I'm a poet and an aspiring science fiction author. This is kind of what I'm doing instead of when I should be writing sci-fi stories. But as a way to procrastinate, I decided to start a podcast about futurism. So I wanted to just outline exactly what I want to get into with you about this today, okay? My concept is, first of all, we're going to talk about a case. I want to make a case for why we should care. Why should we take these claims of radical life extension seriously? And in the process of doing that, I want to talk about some of the people that are involved, the organizations that they help run, and the people who are doing this kind of advocacy, and then sort of what their approaches are like and how they kind of how they mean to extend our lives radically, and the philosophies behind them, And then having given that overview, I would then like to kind of bring up some concerns that the broader public might have, and that some kind of criticisms maybe of what I call the longevity movement. And then after we criticize it a little bit, or at least go over some common concerns, I'd like to do some scenario planning, which is a futurist technique where you pick a date in the future and you say, what is the world going to look like at this time? And you come up with some different scenarios. There's a status quo scenario, an optimistic scenario, a pessimistic scenario, and a disaster scenario. So you have those 4 scenarios, and then you have a 5th bonus miracle scenario, so that you don't end on a bummer note of the disaster scenario. And we'll do that, and I think we'll have a lot more to say maybe when we're thinking about what the future actually may look like in that part of it. And then to finish up, I would like to kind of basically summarize some of the things that we're talking about, and then kind of give a personal opinion, about what we feel like, what the future we want to live in looks like in regards to this life extension stuff, and maybe more broadly, since it's not necessarily the most expansive topic that we know a lot about to talk about. But I'm a generalist, and I've done a little bit of research, and I think it's useful to think about these things, whether you're an activist or whether you're interested in social policy, or whether you're an artist and you want to talk about the future in your science fiction stories like I do. Or just if you're interested in this stuff at all. I mean, I think there's a broad kind of market of people who are underserved in the podcast industry that I'm here to bring to fill that void in your monthly podcast subscription ledger.
All right.
You ready to go then? Does that sound good to you? Well, I guess the first thing I would talk about when you're talking about this concept is the terminology. Okay, you got terms like life extension, right? Anti-aging is another one that's used a lot, and then there's also the term longevity, which has a nice kind of neutral. Longevity is something that everybody should be in favor of, right? I mean.
What's the opposite of longevity? Shortgevity?
Yeah, shortgevity means... No, I think it's mortality, right? I mean,
mortality, right. So you have longevity and mortality.
Longevity, well, I mean, it's kind of... Longevity comes down to life expectancy, I guess, if you want to talk about it more broadly in terms of demographers and stuff. Like, I was looking over the UN... makes these projections that they have a document called World Population to the Year 2300. which is pretty far out looking. And I'm really only interested in kind of talking about maybe at least
Tomorrow.
this century. Yeah, next week. What can we expect in life extension next week? No, I mean, I'm like these other futurist guys. Like, they're mostly, a lot of the big figures in the longevity scene today were born around the 60s, and they want to live to see this stuff really pay off so that they can extend their lifespans. So for me, I'm like, well, let's take their claims and what's going to happen in the next, say, 30 years or so. So when we get to the scenario planning, that's what I'd like to focus on more so. But so that you have this terminology like longevity, life extension, anti-aging, and these are kind of polite ways to say immortality.
Right.
I was watching a documentary. There's some different documentaries about this, and in one of them, I think it's called Exploring Life Extension. They have a guy who says as much of that. He says, really, you can't say you want to be immortal in polite conversation,
So what
that's uncouth.
If you want to be politically correct and you have a PR agency, this is what you say.
Yeah, you say life extension, longevity, anti-aging. So let's just go over the kind of, I guess there's some heroes of the life extension movement maybe, and the most visible one that I can think of is this guy Aubrey de Grey. Now, Aubrey de Grey, he's a researcher or a theoretician in the field of gerontology, and he has a biology degree from Cambridge. And he put out a book called Ending Aging, I think in maybe sometime in 99, 2000 or so, around the end of the century. And that was, and he started breaking out into the scene, into the futurist scene. He's given TED Talks, he's been on Colbert, some guy wrote a book about him. I think there might be more than one book. He's actually even going to he's one of the subjects of a documentary that's coming out that's been at like Sundance and stuff this year. It's coming out this year called The Immortalists, and he's one of the guys. There's another guy, Michael something, I forget, who works on telomeres, but he's been interviewed a bunch of times about it, and he's given lots of interviews. He's been in documentaries. He's given TED Talks. He's the guy who is the main figure that I think most people would find out about if they started looking into this. And he has an organization called SENS, which stands for Strategies for Engineered Negligible Senescience, which means death from old age, I guess, senescience. And they have I could be saying it wrong. I only read things, I don't get to talk about them as much as I read. But they have a program that he's outlined that was kind of the basis of some of his university work, I think. But he calls it the 7 causes of aging, or it's sort of more informally called the 7 deadly things. And what they basically come down to is let me see, I have it written down here. It says molecular processes which roughly equate to various problems associated with DNA mutation, buildup of junk inside and outside cells, and too much or too little cell division. So those things can, you can have heart disease and cancers and all these kinds of diseases of old age that occur, degenerative conditions in the brain and so on, all these things that make aging a terrible, terrible thing. And he wants to cure it all. And he's been promoting the idea that you can cure aging, and other people have latched onto the idea since he started promoting it, and other people have been promoting it as well. And so he kind of represents this view that we can actually extend life and then make people healthier too. So you're not just going to be infirmed when you're old,
So he's interested in like getting rid of the deleterious effects of aging, so that we can have healthier and more productive and enjoyable old ages. I can get behind that. But then he's also gone on to say, I'm guessing, that like in doing that will also cure aging in itself. Like we just
But I think that's the rub about his approach, is that it comes down to, if we can actually tackle those those destructive effects. And that's why he's chosen these 7 classes of them, that we can develop treatments for all of them, and the total effect of that will be to extend the lifespan of humans, and so that further down the road, maybe if more radical interventions become necessary, we can survive to reach them.
Right.
Now, the other
so he's
reason,
sort of like doing the bridge stuff, moving into Ray Kurzweil's ideas.
yes, Kurzweil is another guy who talks about this kind of stuff, and so, you know, for people who don't really know Ray Kurzweil, I think his stature has increased over the years. But before all of this more recent stuff that he's been talking about, he was well known as an inventor. He was on TV shows and stuff, and there's a documentary about Kurzweil that got a lot of people into futurism called The Transcendent Man, that kind of talks about his whole focus on how he wants to, you know, he doesn't want to have to die. He's outlived his father. He famously takes, you know, I mean, I think he was really shaken by his father's death, who died in his 50s or something, or young, relatively young, and he wanted to. I think that had a big impact on him, and so now he has this really strict regimen that he takes all these like 150 supplements a day, and he gets injections weekly of various kinds of serum and that are supposed to keep him healthy. And so he's sort of outlived his father, and he's staying healthy, but he's well known for his notion of the law of accelerating returns. Like he's taken this example of Moore's law, in processing power of computers will double every 18 months or so, and so he's saying you can plot this exponential graph onto all kinds of different technological fields, you know, and you'll actually see progress can fit along these lines. And so we'll reach this point that he did not invent this idea, but he's a big popularizer of it, of the technological singularity, which will be a point sort of like in human history where everything transforms because of technological progress, and will create artificial intelligences that will surpass, you know, the intelligence power of all of humanity put together by sometime around 2045. You know about all this stuff, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
totally.
but just for people who
to give him some, like, because like we kind of saying like he takes all these supplements and whatever, it almost like paints him slightly as a crackpot. But to give him some credit, he's, like you said, a well-known inventor, and his inventions are all based on his ability to predict the future, and he's been well known for being able to predict 15 years out and build and start working on inventions now that he thinks will be viable 10, 15 years out in the future. He's made quite a fortune off of doing it as well.
Well, right, and his whole stature was really boosted, I think, more recently, because at the end of 2013, Google hired him to be their director of engineering, which I have to wonder how much of that, like how much serious engineering he actually is doing in Google. I believe it's reported that he's working on building some kind of, you know, simulated brain AI kind of research. That's the kind of stuff he's into. But you also get the sense that maybe it's kind of a PR hire that sort of signals to the world that Google is interested in forward-thinking projects, and you know, and to that end, they also earlier this year, I believe, or was it last year? I'm not sure what the timeline is exactly with that, with Ray Kurzweil and their other initiative that they recently started, Google Calico, or Calico. I think it's its own Google subsidiary that sort of supplants their previous efforts in this space that they used to have this thing called Google Health.
Yeah.
But now they've got this Calico thing, and when they announced it, they said it's going to be tasked with developing anti-aging therapies.
Interesting.
But the way that they market it is that it's kind of a human health-oriented company in general. Like when they talk about it, they don't say, this is going to be, we're all going to live forever, we're going to cure death, although they do say those things sometimes. But the more broad way they paint it is that this is a company that's going to come up with things that improve human health.
Yeah, totally. General,
you know?
I mean, that's a big field for a lot of tech companies right now. Microsoft's been putting a lot into that too, as well. It's a it seems to be on the radar. All the quantified self, personal health apps, and
Yeah.
wearable technology, and all of that.
Everybody's moving into it, and
Everybody's
there's
moving.
there's a big sense that the health industry itself needs to be shaken up out of its kind of, its
Disrupted.
it needs to get disrupted and privatized and sliced up and sold off to the highest bidder. But or that the record keeping is poor, and it could be more efficient. And so hopefully technology can bring us gains that allow us to bring access to medicine to a greater number of people more broadly. And those are laudable goals, but I think it's going to be a lot harder to get governments to get behind stuff like life extension therapy, because that's anti-aging, right? And that's kind of the difference between. I don't really know how different they are, but I got the sense when I was looking it over that the Aubrey de Grey approach with SENS was that we're going to try to target these effects of aging that are bad, whereas the Google Calico thing is they're kind of more interested in stopping us from aging in the first place. So we never actually get to those problems, or even being able to reverse aging so that we can
You're born and there you are.
You get the sense that you want to be able to just stay 30 years old forever,
Oh, I thought it was 1, because
that's the best age to be.
Yeah,
really, everything
anti-aging, right? So if we take it to its logical extension, it's like
we'll all become embryos.
Yeah, exactly. We'll just stay embryos forever.
In the Matrix.
Yeah.
Upload my embryo.
Anyway, so have they said anything specific? Like, have they explicitly talked about Ray Kurzweil's, or is he going to be part of the Calico project?
I was wondering that myself, and I don't think they've really said anything about him. I don't think they've crossed those realms yet. What I do know is that they announced that this guy Art Levinson is going to run the thing. He's going to be like the director or the CEO or something of it, and he is he's one of the founders or something, or the CEO or something of Genetech or Genetech. Is it called Genetech? They're like an early biotech company that's been around for some time now. And he also sits on the board of directors at Apple, interestingly enough. He actually was, Art Levinson was appointed to direct the board of directors, or to be the chairman of the board of directors after Steve Jobs died. So it's funny that Google and Apple are kind of engaged in this prolonged platform war, but when they announced this Calico initiative, we got a chat on that.
No, it's just me.
Oh,
you're a link for Art Levinson.
Yeah, when they announced he was going to be the guy who was running Calico, when Google announced it, they got Tim Cook, to answer questions about it, and when in the newspaper articles about it or whatever, he was, and Tim Cook went on the record as saying, we all see the sadness and suffering that comes with losing loved ones, and we think Art is going to do a great job, and this stuff that he's doing could really pay off really big and affect everyone's lives, and we support this. So, they might be fighting over the smartphone stuff, but right. Google and Apple can get behind, improving human health together. That's okay, Everybody for now until the research becomes monetizable, and then all bets are off,
So Alcor, do you want to speak about that?
Yeah, that's the other angle that I in the research so the thing is, these guys, they both know that it might not really all play out. The biotech research might not pay off. Like Kurzweil, we didn't really talk about all of his claims, but he talks about nanotech, that we'll have after 2025 or something, we'll start seeing more nanotech applications, and he's one of these boosters of these claims that other people have made about, nanomedicine is going to be this big deal, and you'll have little robot machines in your bloodstream repairing damage to your body and augmenting your consciousness, and you'll be able to
like targeted drugs through nanotechnology.
Right, and all stuff like that's really personally targeted to you. And And I think that we could definitely see a lot of those kinds of things start playing out. Although it remains to be seen how viably effective they are and how transformative it will be. But Kurzweil is convinced that it's all going to transform everything, and by 2045 we should be able to transfer our consciousness from our brains into machines, and then we can live in the cloud.
Is he? I mean, it's been a long time since I've looked into Kurzweil. Is he actually think? Is he a advocate for actual brain uploading, or is he more advocating cybernetic, like slow replacement of your brain tissue with cybernetic tissue?
I think that he has this concept of the bridge 1, bridge 2, bridge 3 thing. And in bridge 1, it's more like the Aubrey de Grey approach, where you're doing biotech to repair the body. And then bridge 2 starts to get into, like, if you need replacement organs or like replacement parts for your brain or something, then we have more cybernetic kind of technological approaches rather than just biotech, but more maybe inorganic kind of things like computers, instead of replacing parts of your brain with computers and so on. So I think he is into that stuff too. And then the third part is then we get to the point where you can upload the brain, and I'm pretty sure that although people have ideas about it, we don't really know yet, like, even if it's like possible, like if it will ever be possible. So I think he's got an open mind about if it'll come from scanning your brain after you die, or replacing your brain gradually with parts of computer parts or something. There's a lot of angles to it that could play out different ways, and I'm sure he's flexible with it. But the other thing is, so that's our good segue into the Alcor thing, because Aubrey de Grey and Ray Kurzweil, they might not see this stuff really take off in their lifetime, so they've also signed up to be cryogenically preserved, and so they're supporters of cryonics, I guess, as it exists today, or I would certainly imagine that they're hoping to see advancements in the field that make it more more demonstrably practical, Because the issue with cryonics right now, I think, is you have a lot of damage from ice crystals and stuff when you're freezing the body to such extreme temperatures that it could just be kind of a pseudo-scientific notion at this point, and people just kind of take it on faith. But the biggest cryo outfit out there, cryonics outfit, I think, is Alcor, and they're based in Scottsdale, Arizona, and they actually have something like 100 people in cryopreservation. If you go to their website, you can look up some of their literature, and they talk about this, and how a good number of them have elected to just have their heads preserved because it costs less, but also it's the idea that the brain is really where the unique stuff about you that you want to preserve is located. And so if you just have the brain, that should be good enough once the technology is sufficiently advanced somewhere down the road. Of course, it's all implicitly, the idea is really, it requires the assumption that there's going to be social stability, so somebody can keep those things plugged in, or they can keep pouring liquid nitrogen on the aluminum containers or whatever, right?
So it doesn't end up as in the Futurama episode.
Yeah, I think Futurama
Futurama, I suppose.
It's the biggest, like, pop cultural touchstone that people probably have for cryonics. Other than that, there was that guy, I think what was his name, Ted Williams or something. He was like a baseball guy or something. I don't know. He got frozen, and it was kind of weird because there was some questions about, like, I think his family questioned how seriously he really wanted to do it or something, but they went ahead with it anyway.
Yeah, and back to Robert Anton Wilson, when his daughter died, she was the first person to have her brain cryonically.
Really?
Yeah, by the Bay Area Cryonics Society.
That's fascinating. That's why I have you on the show.
Piece of note.
Yeah. See, I didn't know that. Yeah. It's funny. You got kind of this weird legendary stuff, like people talk about, like, like the frozen brain of Walt Disney or something. Like there's a secret. I've seen these secret rumors and stuff that get started as kind of these conspiracy theories, and all this stuff kind of lends itself a little bit to the crackpot-dumb, thinking.
Yeah. Totally.
But cryonics could become more of a seriously taken thing if they can demonstrate that it works. I think they asked Neil deGrasse Tyson gave a Ask Me Anything talk on Reddit, and one of the things that they asked him was about cryonics, and he said he didn't think it was viable, and he said, well, prove that it works on a smaller mammal first, and then we'll talk.
Totally.
But then later on, they asked him if he thought that humans would ever reach indefinite lifespans through technology and stuff, and he said, yeah, he thinks that that'll actually happen. But the question is, how long will it take?
Yeah.
So, but the thing about Alcor that I also wanted to touch on is the current CEO of Alcor, and Ray Kurzweil kind of leads us into this stuff too. Is you got the CEO of Alcor, Max Moore, he is credited with coining the modern usage of the term transhumanism. Other people have said it before, but he solidified it in a modern, definition. Sometime, I think around 1990, he published Transhumanism toward a transhumanist philosophy. It's called Transhumanism Toward a Futurist Philosophy. And he founded this thing called the Extropian Institute, and he was probably really responsible in a lot of ways for introducing this kind of, or at least being the strange attractor around which these political leanings will coalesce, but of bringing this libertarian slant to transhumanism, because he has his politics about it, and so I think he's one of the big ones, although he's not as widely known as Kurzweil, but he advocates for all the same kind of stuff, and he's also the CEO of Alcor, and sometimes he goes to conferences and gives talks and stuff, and so he's one of the thought leaders out there of this stuff,
Thought leaders.
Yeah, you like that term? I love those great industry buzzwords. I want to be a thought leader.
Isn't that what we're doing right here? Trying to become thought leaders?
Exactly. We are leading thought right now. And if you're in the thought bandwagon, jump on our thought wagon.
Yeah. So he has both a big libertarian following and big transhumanist following. So do you know if he bring those two camps together and why there's such a big libertarian section of transhumanist thought?
Yeah, I think that's to speculate about that. I think he really infuses transhumanism into libertarianism and vice versa. But you got to figure that he was able to do that. Maybe a guy comes onto the scene and he gives voice to a tendency, a current that's already there, and that's why it becomes something that gains a foothold. And I think that you got to figure there's already a certain, there's a strong disposition for people who are technophiles or into sci-fi or into technological development, into the tech world, that there's assumptions there. Like you have to assume that capitalist development is happening.
They're both very modernist tendencies.
Not to say that you have to have capitalist kind of right-wing libertarianism to get to futurist or transhumanist conclusions, because there's in the history of it all, like there was sort of Russian cosmicists in the early right around the time of the Russian Revolution, who were kind of advocating similar things, that we should explore space and evolve and become like, it's kind of the idea, it's almost like a religiously inspired thing that God is out there in the cosmos, and to be known we should aspire to be divine in that way and kind of go out and seek our destiny in the stars, And so that was probably those currents animated a lot of the the Russian side of the buildup in the Cold War and the space race and stuff, right? And so that was a current in futurist thought in the past, but after the fall of the Soviet Union and kind of the late 20th century, ideological malaise, where now we have this world where there is no alternative really to capitalism at large, in the major powers of the world are all basically on board. And so it's hard to imagine futures without that component to it, but also because you
Well, I
have,
think part of it has to do with like a lot of that sort of projection is coming out of the Industrial Revolution and the Scientific Revolution,
good
which rose
Enlightenment values.
alongside of capitalism and socialism, for that matter of fact. And you're not going to get that sort of futurist projection and that until you get these technological advances. So it makes sense to me that they have ideological overlap.
Yes, I agree completely, because it requires a certain way of looking at time in the first place, right? It
Yeah,
requires a certain kind of cosmology.
it requires
Um,
clocks.
what did you say?
It requires clocks. Oh, I mean, according to Jared Diamond, that's one of the biggest technological innovations that changed the way we thought about the world, including the future, was the invention of timekeeping devices. And
Right,
that comes directly out of modern science as well. So
right, and then you have,
before that, we thought of time as cyclical mainly, and so you didn't have huge future projections because the future was the same.
right,
Um, and then plus, we saw the future generally going downhill, like we're falling from grace, whereas
yeah,
now we're rising into grace or something like that.
rising into our destiny to explore the
Yeah,
cosmos forever and
yeah.
yada
Become
yada
beings
yada.
of light. I'm telling you, that's the end.
Well, right. There's even a kind of maybe a psychedelic wing of the transhumanists who they don't have as much of maybe these political slants necessarily, but it's more about the evolution of human consciousness or something,
Yeah,
right?
that's like what the well, I mean, how we were talking earlier. What's his name? Not yeah, Terrence McKenna, but then recently picked up by what's that guy's name? He's creates this documentary. He's like super energetic, super excited about the future and the future of consciousness and humanity.
Jason Silva,
Yeah, thank you.
the
Yeah,
Ashton
that guy.
Kutcher of the singularity, as Doug
Yeah, there you go.
Rush
Thank. Anyway,
yeah, he's definitely out there, and he's just voraciously propagating these ideas as soon as he discovers them. It seems like, he's like he'll get really turned on by, like I remember listening to him. I listened to a podcast where he introduces Dennis McKenna and Douglas Rushkoff when
well, that's
Dennis McKenna had just written, Terrence McKenna's brother had just written a book about him around the time of 2012 when Terrence McKenna's predictions for the time wave theory where we were going to reach the infinite novelty point, And so they were doing kind of a retrospective on the 2012 thing, but Jason Silva, introduced them and he was saying, and Douglas Rushkoff is a great thinker, and he's like, I just discovered your work a year ago, and as soon as I read your book, I knew I had to get in touch with you. I started pounding you on Twitter, and I hounded you until you agreed to meet me. So he's very enthusiastic about all of
he's
these.
super enthusiastic. It actually reminds me. I mean, that sort of enthusiasm is part of why I became a little bit less enthusiastic because it was kind of a mirror of my own self. I was like, wait, do I sound like that? Because that sounds foolish to a certain degree. It's just like this like underlying assumption that everything will be fine and everything's great and everything full. It's kind of a harkening back to like humanitarian or not humanitarian, but humanist progressive principles that the modern world will save humanity.
Yeah, techno-deterministic kind of. It's almost a religious faith in technology,
Yeah, totally.
So did I cover all of the guys that I wanted to talk
Yeah,
about in the beginning
we've
of
got
the?
up to Max Moore.
Yeah, so those are the main guys, and they represent various approaches, I think. And there's a lot of other people too, and there's even people starting political parties and stuff to promote longevity because they feel like you're going to have to get the states on board. You don't want them to put regulations up that will block it, and you want them to fund it too. And it might be hard to get them to fund it. I mean, there's all these other kind of pressing concerns. And so you probably want to try to get ahead of that and try to influence the system politically so that the political climate is friendly to these developments. So all that being said, and we kind of did an overview of the whole longevity scene, a brief overview. really only skimming the surface. I mean, I was doing research on this stuff, and it just really, it will boggle your mind and bore you to tears if you let it. But I really wanted to kind of start thinking about some, criticisms or possible objections or concerns that people might have about this stuff. And there's some broad categories of these concerns, I think. And so one of the things is the concerns that I think most people have at first, there's a lot of religious concerns. There's a sense of, that you might have environmentalists or religious conservatives who feel like we shouldn't tamper with the natural order. We shouldn't be trying to play God, so to speak. And, those concerns don't really move me as much, I guess, because I think we are already doing all of those things in a lot of other ways. Since we've been deforming our environment to help ourselves thrive, we've already kind of entered a Promethean deal, And the other thing...
So then the other concerns would fall around, they would be humanist concerns, like how are these things going to disrupt the social fabric of our lives? Are they going to be equitable? Are they going to be environmentally friendly? Can they be? So on and so forth.
Right.
Yeah.
I think so. That's another broad kind of facet of this, is like the problem of overpopulation and all of those kinds of issues that come with that, about resource competition and and then the social concerns of what happens to society when more people are living longer lives. And those are questions that we are going to have to deal with anyway socially, whether or not we end up ever being able to radically extend the human lifespan. There's already a lot of debate about public policy around taking care of the elderly, and the sort of this, at least in the U.S., where we're having the baby boomers are getting older, and who's gonna pay to take care of, who's gonna pay, we're not gonna have as many younger workers, who's gonna pay into the social security systems, and so on. And this is also a concern in other parts of the world, as Russia and Germany and Japan are facing aging population replacement rate.
Yeah.
But then there's other population concern. Well, most of the population growth is going to be happening in other places, and they might have different takes on this. But really, if you talk to the life extension guy, or if you read what they have to say about it, rather, they kind of brush off these overpopulation concerns as like, we're going to have to figure out how to deal with it. Maybe down the road, space colonization and stuff becomes necessary, or maybe even seasteading, and we'll have more, try to find more ways to make more of the Earth habitable for people, because there's going to be more people. And these are challenges that we're going to have to face anyway, But the biggest concern to me, I think, that I've come across and thought about myself, is sort of what happens to the social dynamics of human civilization when the older generation who is in power can extend their lifespan. Like, if they could live indefinitely, then would social progress become stunted? Because there's there's the Max Planck notion of like science advances one death or one funeral at a time. So could you say the same?
That's a question that I've thought about too, particularly regarding, though it's coming from a little bit of a different angle. If you have an indefinite lifespan, is it worth living if your mind can't change? Like, do you want to stick with your same ideology for the next 10,000 years? So I'm not. I mean, maybe you do, but it begs the question of whether or not that's actually a concern, because we don't know what happens to people's minds and ideas as they live for thousands of years.
Right. Like, maybe the whole thing where people dig in and become more entrenched in their fixed ideology, maybe that actually might be a side effect of of sort of brain how brain development happens and over the course of a natural human lifespan, and you kind of you have less flexibility as you go on, and maybe this is just some kind of
Well, also
side
it might
effect of
be,
aging.
what I was thinking is it might be a side effect of the possibility that you're actually going to die. Like you can be selfish and not think about the future if you know you're not going to be in the future.
Right. Like so you might as well just profit as much as you can, because
Yeah.
if you leave
If,
the world as a as a smoldering husk of a world for the next generation, it doesn't really matter to you.
yeah.
Whoa, whoops. But maybe those concerns would actually be alleviated uh, in the process of extending the human lifespan. So those remain open questions.
Yeah. Yeah. Open questions.
And so those are the main ones that I wanted to actually address. I guess there's other kinds of issues, or you could argue about whether if we became sort of like immortal beings and upgraded to transhumanist lives in the cloud, and we left our fleshy forms in the past, will we be able to keep expanding and growing and changing as we explore the universe forever, or will the universe keep expanding? I think that's the more recent cosmological picture that scientists are saying is that it will keep expanding, maybe, and so maybe we will be able to keep going forever, or maybe everything will kind of come to some kind of end of the universe or something, and then we won't be able to live further anyway.
Yeah.
So people argue about these kinds of definitions of immortality, but those things are so far removed from the human life that we're experiencing now. Somebody else can worry about them after we're all gone, I guess.
Yeah. There is I forgot. Lost my train of thought.
You'll think of it again. So
Okay.
that's I think that does a pretty good job of covering some of the concerns, and we're sort of getting on to. It's been about an hour and a half already,
Wow.
and I think you have to get going in probably another 45 or something at the latest, or right there. So why don't we talk a little bit about? We spent about as much time as I could have hoped for so far already, but let's talk a little bit about the scenario planning. And this is the part when I wrote this long essay about this stuff. I called it the 5 fake futures, because I'm the fake futurist. That's right. But this is a scenario planning technique that I picked up, seen people do it in the past and stuff, but I didn't know it was an actual thing that futurists do until I read this book on futurism and futuring, as it's called, by this guy Edward Cornish, who he's the world president, or the president of the World Futurist Society and editor of the Futurist magazine.
Yeah, I think Bucky Fuller is who really brought. If wasn't one of the first who started scenario plannings, he really
promoted it.
popularized scenario planning.
Yeah, he's definitely one of the major, futurists of the history of futurism.
His past futurism.
Yeah. And still very relevant, I think. But so the scenario planning bit is basically, if you're watching the video, I have the little quadrants up here. But so you try to imagine stuff that's going to happen in the future. You pick and you come up with a status, or also known as a no surprises scenario. If we see happening will continue to happen, which, of course, some trends are liable to reverse and things are liable to change. Naturally, there's no way we can really know, and it's all chaotic. But, it just gives us one picture. We're not saying this is really what's going to happen, but just to help us think about it, And then we'll get a baseline from that, and then, that'll allow us to take off and take more optimistic takes or more pessimistic takes and imagine some more disastrous or almost apocalyptic scenarios, and even some transformative, miraculous scenarios. I also think that there's good illustrations of some of these ideas are to be found in popular culture and fiction and movies and stuff like that. So I know you're really interested in global development and kind of the near-term future of how we're going to progress as a species, and how societies can try to make the shift to more sustainable, resilient kind of models. So what do you think about if we said 30 years out from today? I'm just picking, since it's 2014 right now, I'm saying 2044, which is conveniently 1 year before Ray Kurzweil's singularity. So if we imagine what the world's going to be like 1 year before the singularity, and what do you think we might see?
Which
Do you have any
scenario?
broad themes? Because I've looked at it a little bit. Like, there's broad stuff. Most of it, population. We look at interested in what population is going to be like.
Oh, population-wise, oh, I don't know. 30 years from now, I don't want to be quoted on this, but I'm pretty sure population-wise, its current projections is between 7,000 and about 7 billion.
Between 7,000 people and 7,000 billion people.
Yeah.
Somewhere in there.
Between that 7 billion and 14 billion, and that latest stuff I've looked at is saying status quo projections are about 9 billion. But there's a lot of work being done in trying to get family planning and education and access to contraceptions and whatnot to the places where the biggest population explosions are happening, which is India and parts of Southeast Asia and parts of Africa. Right. So there's a lot of hope that it could actually go down, but then there's a lot of pushback on the other hand of, like, I guess what I would call traditionalist groups who believe that the women should stay at home and get married at 14 and have 20 kids, and then there's like lack of access to health care, so they have lots of children because they think that a lot are going to die, and so on and so forth, that can push them up the other way. So it's a broad range.
The classic line on it, I think, is really that if you want to, get population to growth to slow down, then you really have to improve the quality of life for people.
Yeah,
they have
particularly
to have
education and female empowerment, I suppose. Access.
Women need to have access.
Women ability to choose when they're going to have kids, and have access to discreet birth control. Those are the three big things.
Right. So if we just looked at the status quo, and I looked at some of the figures, like they're projecting that even though the birth rate is kind of not all that high in the U.S., because of immigration, the U.S. will see a population growth of up to something or around like 400 million people instead of the 312 we have or so now.
We're also in the U.S. The U.S. is somewhat of an anomaly amongst Western or developed countries, where we actually are still seeing population growth, where most other Western countries aren't. But at the same time, we also have really terrible education and social support and healthcare and so on and so forth. So it kind of makes sense. Yeah.
Well, I think that because of the growing population and the aging population, one of my sort of predictions for 2044 would be that the U.S. will move more towards a more socialized medical system.
Yeah, I think so too.
If not,
we're already kind of moving in that direction.
Right, and demographically, like millennials, they're saying are more open to, having a larger government that provides more services and stuff. Yeah. They actually, a small majority, last I saw, like 51% or something, supports that. So I think demographically we could see that shift, and it probably will become necessary by then, unless the life, the rejuvenation therapies really make life a lot easier for the elderly. More broadly, I was thinking, societies are going to have to, make concessions in workplaces or to find new arrangements to allow people to work longer and, have transportation and things like that in society arranged to facilitate an aging population, making life easier for them, Yeah. So the longevity stuff kind of...
it ties back into other things that we're not touching on as much, but things like robotics and things that will make life easier, AI, because, Bruce Sterling talks about it, like if you have huge reversal of population pyramids where you have giant large aged populations and very small, um, um, what do you call them, young
Cohort.
populations, then who takes care of the older population?
Yeah.
Both economically and not just economically, like who's feeding into the social security systems,
Yeah.
but who's literally taking care of them? Where's the workforce that's needed to provide nursing care and health
Right.
care and so on and so forth?
Well, I think in the U.S. it's really going to be, it's going to look kind of like how it looks now. Like you're going to have an aging population and a lot of immigrants taking care of them.
Yeah, yeah,
You know,
that's what it's going to look like, or that's
but
what
it,
a lot of people project it's going to be in a lot of the Western world.
right,
So
and then,
that
but in like
speaks to
Japan, you'll
immigration
have like a
laws as
bunch
well.
of right, exactly. Like what about a place like Japan, where they're famously not as friendly to immigration, so they're gonna is Japan gonna have like a lot more healthcare robots,
Yeah,
robotics
and
industry?
I mean, I just read something recently talking about that Japan's been considering being more lax on their immigration laws for this exact reason as well.
Yeah, because the replacement rate is not happening. And I've
Yeah,
actually, I saw this. Somebody was interviewing Elon Musk about his broad concerns about the future, and they were asking him if he was worried about overpopulation, and he was saying he was worried about the replacement rate. He was saying the problem with civilization is it's going to disappear if we don't replace ourselves.
yeah.
So even
Well,
if
it's
you
because
take
as we become more liberal, we have less children generally.
well, right, and as you have more access to education and medicine and
Yeah, exactly.
kind of biotech and stuff even. So we might have like the opposite kind of problems
Yeah,
as the people predicting over. But that would you have to assume though that there's some development implied in there that the developing world
yeah,
is going to become not as impoverished and have
yeah,
greater access to resources and take
yeah.
care of their populations.
It's the only way that that would happen.
Right.
Otherwise, what will happen is we'll have huge explosions in the developing world of population to decline in the developed world already, and then create massive social tensions.
Yeah.
This is me speculating, but even potentially leading into like big, like world wars because of the population tensions between developing huge populations and small populations in the developed world that have huge access to resources but no one to use them, but still trying to hold their boundaries in some way.
Yeah, like you're sort of having Europe is sort of going to be declining, but you have the population, like you were saying, in India rising. India is going to is set to become the most populous nation in the
Yeah,
world.
yeah, in just like
Um,
10 years, it's
yeah,
going to.
and by 24 or by 2050, I think they were saying I was and the UN stuff that I think I was looking at a Pew report about it was citing some of those UN studies, and they were saying that India will have a larger population than China and the U.S.
Yeah,
combined because
yeah,
China is actually slowing their population growth.
yeah,
They've been successful at that, and that's why they've actually had to, or they've loosened up on the kind of the population control restrictions. But let's not think so much about the
yeah,
global warfare and stuff for the moment, and talk
yeah,
about. I think we kind of ran over a little bit of
yeah,
the status quo scenario. So what about an optimistic world? Uh, this means different things to different people, right? The status quo is kind of a pessimistic scenario if you're a socially concerned activist, or even if you're a longevity activist and you don't want to see the status quo, you want to see breakthroughs.
right,
So, but in an optimistic world, for the longevity guys, they're going to get their stuff, their goodies. They're going to get the technologies that make it possible to live longer. But for me, the optimistic part would be really, if such things were possible, we wouldn't have neglected other social problems. We wouldn't have neglected the diseases of poverty, or
yeah.
the sort of the mortality that happens that can be prevented already.
In your view, in an optimistic world, if we're moving past just the longevity folk getting their way, and then does everyone have access to this in your view? Would that be part of an optimistic view?
Well, I think optimistically you'd have to say if it were possible, then it should be broadly available. And
Mm,
it shouldn't be coercive, but it should be available to people who want it. And
right.
then there has to maybe be other kinds of ways of mitigating, social tensions between
Right.
the cohort that adopts it and the cohort that doesn't. You
So
know,
one more question about the optimistic worldview then. So if everyone has access, then what what prevents like huge population explosions? Is people in the optimistic worldview, people are voluntarily not having children, or we found some way to mitigate that through space exploration by even 30 years into the future?
I don't think you see the thing is that I don't I the conclusion that I came to is that 30 years into the future we're not going to know because
Yeah,
there won't be that many people
yeah,
around, who are I mean, I'm assuming that we don't see the breakthroughs until 30 years out really. I
right,
don't
right,
I mean, but even if we see them if we see it happening more soon, then we won't really I mean, I don't know if we'll actually be able to extend the lifespan of someone
right,
who's already 100 years old right now
right,
in 15 years and say,
right,
should you be able to go, for 50 more years or something?
right,
Would they even want to do that?
right.
It's like I think it's going to be too early to tell. So it's
So,
not.
so, so from an optimistic viewpoint, 30 years from now, what it basically means is that the breakthroughs have happened, and that and they're accessible to all, and now we need to start working on what that means for futures past 30 years.
Yes, totally. And I think that really the conclusion that I get out of it is that we need to deal with these with our solvable, kind of political and cultural questions that we have currently to prepare the world for a time when such radical technologies that may become available are going to become really,
Yeah,
could become more problematic. Because if we don't deal with with the questions of inequality or access to medicine and things like that now, then the leap that we take from the jump off point that we reach later in the future could take us in directions that become very dark, that
yeah,
become undesirable.
that makes sense.
So
So you want,
let's
yeah,
think about that a little bit. As long as we're kind of that's a good segue into looking at more of the disastrous potentials for these kinds of things. And so that's my other kind of notion about this is that it's not so much it's like the longevity issue itself is either going to happen or not. Like Aubrey de Grey gives it 50-50 odds that by 2045 or so we'll have indefinite lifespan. But it's all these other social questions that I think are the ones that really make or break the issue for me about if it's a good or a bad thing per se.
totally.
And I'm wondering if I just read this and actually an article today that somebody wrote. Let me see if I can look up the guy's name here. It was a piece in Jacobin called "Blood Banking" by this guy Cyrus Lewis, and it's he talks about the global industry or the market, the trade of human organs and tissues and blood, and he talks about how you might imagine that this is stuff that it's healthy people are donating their good organs so that unhealthy people can have access to them. But really, what a lot of it comes down to is that poor people are selling selling their
Organ.
tissue and
Yeah.
organs and blood so that wealthier nations have access to this kind of technology. And he mentions that there was an article recently about that there was some researchers had this breakthrough in taking an old mouse was they gave transfusion of blood from a young mouse into an old mouse, and this led to the old mouse exhibiting more health and signs of being younger in some ways. And so he speculates off from that point. He kind of does his own bit of futuring in the article that I thought was kind of funny. That he's like, what if we come to this point in the future where the old are able to stay young forever, and the richest members of the elderly, wealthy, are able to basically literally suck the blood from young healthy people to be able to stay
Totally.
alive longer.
Kind of harvest the youth for this elite class to stay. I mean, wait, isn't that what's already happening? Oh.
Well, that reflects our current anxieties about the broad inequities that we see in society today. But by imagining the failure modes of the future, we can project these anxieties that we have now and see, wouldn't it be really terrible if things continued to trend in that direction? And particularly because if such a class existed, then and they were able to hold on to their power for that much longer, then maybe that could seriously stunt the social progress of civilization. It would call into question our whole notions of progress, which, of course, I'm trying to do in the first place here about techno progress in general. But yeah, there are those potential questions, or I guess it would also be pessimistic if we didn't develop these therapies. If from the perspective of the longevity activists, if we didn't develop these therapies, or if there's even this transhumanist writer guy Zoltan Istvan published a sci-fi novel last year called The Transhumanist Wager, which is kind of an Atlas Shrugged sort of for the 21st century in the mold of that kind of a book. It's about a guy who promotes life extension, travels around the world, but the governments of the world become taken over by theocrats, and they outlaw transhumanist research and stuff. And so him and all of the brightest scientists of the world who are pro-transhumanism go and they build a seasteading colony called Transhumania, where they continue their research, and then they eventually come into a conflict with the rest of the governments of the world, and they end up destroying all of the navies of the world, and they send their drones out to blow up all of the buildings of the government
from their seasteading colony.
From their seasteading colony, and they basically set up this new dictatorship where they are allowed to decide who gets access to the life extension therapies. And they actually, in the book, like, they have a council and people apply for grants for longevity, and they're like, oh, this poor person who wasted their life, they're not good enough for this stuff. Like, we shouldn't waste it on them. So those are kind of pessimistic views too. It's like, who gets to decide who has access to medical treatments? And those are questions that we're already grappling with, right?
Something you brought up to me also made me realize that that you brought up right now made me realize there's another pessimistic scenario, is that these kind of like anti-aging folk that could potentially like be just against life extension at all, because, and I think it becomes like that's why the conversation becomes important, because we already are extending our life. Mm-hmm. And so if you're going to take a hard stance on the other side, saying we shouldn't extend our life, I can see it going to the extreme of saying something like, well, we should stop developing medical technology. We should stop developing medicine. Like, people should die of natural causes. We should stop healing ourselves at all.
Right.
And so where is that middle line where where do you say, actually, no, at this point, we're not going to try to cure that thing. We're actually not going to try to help you live a better life as you're older. And I don't know, that I don't have a good answer to that, but that I think it's an interesting question.
Yeah, neither do I, and I think that is a really critical question. Because there's something about this more broadly that people should have access to life-saving therapies, of course. Exactly. And it's like, and you don't want coercion where it's like, oh, you're forced to live forever. Like, that's kind of crazy, right? But the more practical thing is, you don't want coercion that says you don't have access to this.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's like I know that or I found this great essay that somebody, I forget who wrote it, but if you look it up, I'll post it in the show notes eventually. but it's something called the biomedical embrace, and it's kind of like humanity's sort of critical study about our relationship to biotechnology and what it does for us and how we conceive of ourselves differently through it and so on. But there's a great little phrase in it that says something, I'm paraphrasing here, but basically it says, medical technology creates a political economy of hope, which is to say, like, if you have some kind of chronic illness that would shorten your normal lifespan, then if there's a new technology that comes along that allows you to lengthen your shortened lifespan to a more normal length, then that gives you all these more options that you didn't have before, and this creates an economy of hope that allows you to participate in society more fully. And so shouldn't the elderly have access to those kinds of things as well? And this is an argument that the longevity activists, that some of them make, is that it's actually, to deny longevity research is like an ageist proposition.
Yeah, that makes sense actually to me a little bit.
Yeah, I I don't have a good argument against that. I think that's a compelling line of reasoning. But then the questions become, how do we choose to dedicate these resources? Because the longevity activists are saying it's critical, we have a moral obligation to pursue these lines of research because it's possible, and because then we can extend the lifespans of people and add that much more value to people's lives and so on.
Yeah, that's a nuanced argument about the dedication of public resources to various lines of research. Another question I have, though, is, do you want to stop research altogether? Because I can see it easily. I can see how they could get money outside of government funding to bring this research online. So because there's like a lot of rich old folk that I'm sure wouldn't mind putting money into it.
Well, and wealth tends to skew old too.
Yeah, exactly. But then there's also a question: is if it's so back to like the public-private allocation of resources. There's a question, I think, of if it is privately funded, then it might not be as widely accessible as well.
Right.
So there might be a stronger argument to actually let's publicly fund this sort of thing so that people other than the rich can have access to this.
Yes, and if you ban it or put limits on it or so on, or even just don't fund it, then you maybe have the effect of kind of driving it underground or driving it into private hands, or
the stem cell stuff.
Yeah, there's already those kinds of bioethics debates. And then, maybe you'll see more development happen in places where there's less government regulation, naturally, in the more developed world.
Not just in life extension technologies, but just in a lot of different technologies that we're unsure of in the U.S. or the Western world, and you have stronger regulation, and there's been projection that uncertainty or that regulation on these technologies will actually turn us into, I guess, second-world players instead of first-world players.
Right.
Like Jeremy Rifkin talks about the third industrial revolution, and that happening in developing world because of the strict regulations we have in the developed world.
And those I would definitely take those views into account when doing any kind of thinking about long-term, or at least mid-term, near future, mid-future term projections in the few decades out. And so if you're really into this stuff, maybe you want to start globe-trotting around and finding the climates that are least hostile to your research, but also you want to engage with the political structures that exist in the developed world as well, because they have the potential to take leadership positions in these things too, if they don't reject it more broadly. But I do agree that it's, even if you're more concerned about inequality and access to medicine and stuff, you should still engage with these things, like you're saying. I think there's a good argument to be made there for that.
And so I want to say one last thing, sorry. It's just because a lot of from my understanding of developing countries, it's not that we're actually pretty unregulated, particularly in the U.S. It's more that in a lot of developing economies, there's not a kind of like entrenched. I'm at a loss for words a little bit. There's not like an entrenched system that it already is benefiting from not having these technologies in place, like an entrenched medical system or whatnot. So it's not that there's lack of regulation; they just don't have that inertia, and so the regulation's different and more able to feed into more what we would think of as futuristic technologies.
Sure. Because there's less established players who already have kind of sunk costs into a certain kind of infrastructure, a certain way. Yeah, and then so they can maybe leapfrog some of those stages of development.
Yeah.
Which I think is, in the most hopeful views, you can hope that the developing world will be able to leapfrog the most destructive stages of kind of industrial development.
Yeah. Anyway, that's the last thing I wanted to say on that.
Well, that's great. I wanted to talk maybe a little bit about the disaster scenario and the miracle scenario, but I got to take a break here really quick. I'll be right back. Just give me a second, okay?
Okay.
This is the part. This is actually something I'll have to edit out of the show. You just riff extemporaneously if you want to.
Okay. I'm riffing extemporaneously, singing a song about things. That's my song. Hello, camera. Hello, world. If anyone's out there, this is live. This is Zaq Moser. My name is Comfy Core. You can call me the Mighty Bearded Warrior, but right now my beard is missing because it's springtime, and every springtime I cut off my beard because it gets warm outside. But generally, I'm the Mighty Bearded Warrior. Also, my hair's cut. Yay! What else do y'all want to know? I could make a rap song about my surroundings. There's a refrigerator and it has some magnets on it. This isn't more of a kid song than a rap song. And there's some other cute things that my girlfriend made for me. Yay. Okay. This is the first time, well, actually, it's the second time that I've done something like this, so I'm kind of excited. It's interesting because when talking, there's a feeling of stage. There we go. Got Lance back, so I can stop talking to myself. All right, cool.
Okay, I haven't heard anything that you've been saying here, so I hope it was brilliant.
No, it wasn't. I sung a song about my surroundings.
Oh, did you? That's great. Entertainment value.
Yeah. And then I started talking about the like post-structuralism and how having a camera on you changes the dialogue, and this is the first time in a while that I've had a camera on me. So,
well, I really appreciate you stopping in, or agreeing to do this with me, because I mean, it would be a lot less interesting to just watch me like ranting about this,
I'd be interested.
Well,
I'd be interested in a way that we can't talk because families might be watching.
We can have more private discussions about this where we get into our really seamy, seedy kind of more.
Have you ever wanted to take seeds and then grow them in the seams of your coats? So then you could have things that were both seedy and seamy at the same time.
And unseemly.
Unseemly.
Is that the right word? I don't even know if that's the right term.
I don't know. I like your facial hair.
I like your face in general. My next question to you is, and I hope we can probably start trying to get to the end of this here, because
we're going for a while.
And you got to get going here pretty soon. But so let's just. I think we've kind of, I don't know how explicitly we need to really go over the worst case disaster kinds of scenarios of it. We're still living with the Cold War kind of.
I would just say nuclear holocaust.
Right, that's a pretty bad one. But you also got your nanotech gray goo destroys.
Gray goo, which is actually really, from the stuff I've read, is very, very. It's
overblown, right?
Likely and not scientifically sound.
Sure.
Anyway.
You have this other guy, Hugo de Garis, who writes about artificial intelligence, and he says that it's almost inevitable that there will be a war between the people who embrace the AI and become like the machines, and the people who reject that technology. And so it's going to lead to this global holocaust of, cyborgs versus unaugmented humans or something. And
Well,
those are disaster scenarios,
those
I
are
mean,
definitely disaster scenarios. I was thinking along similar lines. It's like we're talking about population problems, but we're not even taking robots into account. So even if like we could upload our minds into robots, what about all the other artificial intelligences that are also going to be replicating themselves, and we're just getting in their way? So
yeah.
it's not just a biological population problem; it's a biological cyborg robotic population problem.
Right. It's
And,
most of our views on the future are very much human-centric. Our whole civilization, our whole societies and cultures and stuff are very much of a human-dominant kind of, picture of the world. And so it would bear well
as
on
if human was one singular thing that could be dominant in one singular way.
yeah, I mean, it's, there's other views that we're part of this kind of, interconnected web of life or whatever. And then there's also those questions on the other side of what happens when we create our own successors, or invent new forms of life. Will silicon-based life forms?
Or when you have like genetic engineering and you're building vacuum cleaner dogs, right?
Yeah. Or
Sentient vacuum cleaner dogs at that. So that
does it
not
have
only
to be
can they
made out
clean
of?
your rug, they can have an intelligent conversation with you.
Yeah, basically it amounts to everybody gets to have a sentient slave being to do their bidding for them, which
Right? And they're
then
just
you're gonna
right below that level of sentience that we have to give them rights.
exactly, and that's so those are also concerns that we should think about the whole legal juridical regime and the whole ontological basis for the foundation of rights for
Well,
sentient
those were some
beings.
fancy words right there. That was a
We
good.
got to think about it. You know, just saying that we were created equal is not, that it's self-evident or whatever. I mean, that's not good enough
It
because,
is not self-evident.
yeah, it relies on a lot of
I was.
assumptions there.
Can I go off on a little bit of a tangent here?
Hey,
It's
it's
like
all about your
so.
time, man. You do it.
So we have like humanitarian, humanist. Fuck, I can't. Oh, damn it.
I'll just have to edit that part out. Okay, it's okay.
Okay. No, we have um, what's the name of the movement that came out of the rationalist movement, like with Kant and the industrial era? It's the humanist movement. Yeah, right. That's what we're got. Humanist movement says that rights are transcendental. They apply to everyone equally, right? And that's what a lot of modern nation states are built upon. That's why when I go to get food stamps, it says that they can't deny me based on my sex, based on my gender, based on my whatever, any superficial characteristics. It is the Department of Human Services. So they have to give me rights based on, or give me services based on that I am human, unless I'm not from America,
Right.
because then I'm not human. Then I'm an immigrant, and immigrants aren't human. Um,
Yes,
so,
they're
so, so
second-class humans in this
Yeah, they're
scenario.
second class humans. So I can be anything superficially, but if I'm not from America, I can't get the services from the Department of Human Services in America. Of course, that's not the way it is everywhere, but it does beg the question of should we change that to the Department of Sentient Services at a certain point?
Yeah, or there wasn't there something that came out recently about how India was going to grant human rights to dolphins or something? There was some
I
kind
did
of
not know that, but that's
there was
kind of
something about non-human persons, I think is the one of the terminologies that's been adopted around
yeah,
that kind of question. And
yeah,
those we may very well face those questions, but to me it would be good to tackle them whether or not we have AI and things like that because of the interdependency in the web of life and other kinds of
yeah,
conscious entities on Earth, and our own sort of cultural biases that humanity has had in
yeah,
opposition to the rest of the world, at least in
yeah.
some parts of the world, in the Western world that I grew up in. That's a big factor.
Yeah. Yeah, and even if it's not happening now, we need to think about those questions for the future. Is if like how do you define sentience, right? At what point does something become sentient? And it applies to the web of life as well as artificial intelligences.
Right.
Like right now, we're already having Google Now, Siri, like little artificial like smart people inside our phones helping us out and stuff. And at what point do those? Is it something like a Turing test? Like if we can't tell the difference between them and human, then do we have to treat them as human?
Yeah.
I don't know. Just questions.
There's this great bit in the Charlie Stross novel Accelerando where there's a snippet of conversation that some side characters are having in the back at this bar, where they're arguing about whether or not the Turing test amounts to a kind of a Jim Crow law or something against sentient AIs and stuff. But it's those things. I want to get more in depth into those things in the next episode that I do, because the first episode I thought immortality would be a good subject, and then the second episode I thought artificial intelligence is a large site of discourse that we could get into. Or I don't know if you'll be available again, or if I'll have to find a new co-host. But artificial intelligence could be the second episode, and that would be a good transition from episode 1 to episode 2. But I was going to say, so we looked at some disasters, and so what about, before you have to go, do you think we could talk about some miracle scenarios here?
I forgot we were doing miracle scenarios. Well, do you want to kind of merge that in, like the miracle scenarios, into what we would like to see?
Yeah, I guess that would be a good way to end it up, right? Whoops. That would be a good way to end it, and I think it's important to sort of, I've been trying to be somewhat objective when I was researching and writing the article that I based this discussion on, but you got to make some choices too. You got to stand for something. So let's imagine that, and for me it's kind of like the optimistic scenario, but let's take our optimistic scenario and put it on steroids or something.
Yeah,
right?
let's amplify that stuff.
So what, to me, it's the big thing is like the developing world, we are able to, they're able to leapfrog the worst effects of industrialization. We're moving into a world where, kind of like the Jeremy Rifkin idea of, he's saying that the the internet and renewable energy sources will become the communications energy matrix that drives human civilization in the 21st century.
About that. It's pretty good.
Yeah, his book, the zero marginal cost of society.
Yeah,
it's pretty good.
It's interesting.
Right on that.
I like it because back to like how I got into some of this stuff, I was very involved in the zeitgeist movement back in the day. Also, when I was naive in a lot of ways, and it's interesting to see someone like Jeremy Rifkin, who has some clout out there promoting these ideas that are basically the same thing that they were saying 5-10 years ago.
They're still saying it, and if you're
it was just fringe at the time back then, and now it's like moving into like mainstream, like.
Oh, absolutely. And you have your attendant discussions of like basic income questions and stuff like that come along with ideas about techno unemployment becoming
unemployment and stuff.
Right. And so those are actually becoming more and more prevalent themes. And I do want to talk about that in another future episode
Later
after the AI thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's like I almost want to rush through these prerequisite subjects to get to the really.
How long did you say we have? Like 8 hours? Maybe we should just do it all right now.
Yeah, we'll just do episode 1, 2, and 3 all right now. That sounds great. But you said you have to go out meet some people and stuff.
Yeah, well,
I don't want you to.
I'm not actually going to do that all right now, but there's no big push or anything either.
Okay. Well, that's great. Well, let's. What do you have any particular feelings about?
optimistic or like what? No, miraculous scenarios is what we're talking about. Transformatively miraculous scenarios is what I'm looking at right now, from Zaq's perspective. Zaq with a Q's perspective.
Yeah.
So I remember. Let's just pretend, because I don't have a lot of ideas. Let's take Zaq back about 6 years into his like libertarian anarchist leaning, like idealist, like we're going to change the world and make it good tomorrow way. And this is so I remember I used to say I was going to run for president. In my campaign, what's the thing that you call your platform, right?
Yeah, your platform.
My platform was going to be no more death, no more taxes, right? Because they say the two,
yeah,
like hyper libertarian, right?
You could probably get a lot of funding for that.
Yeah. And it was all based on this idea of like I want to be. It's not that I'm anti-death. I'm just pro-choice. That's
right.
funny.
You just wanted the ability to choose.
Yeah, I want to choose when I die.
Could happen to you.
And I want to choose to live a nice old life, productive and like healthy and feeling good, and I want to be able to at a certain point be like, I'm done. I've done what I've wanted to do. I've seen what I've wanted to see. I've bleepity bleep what I wanted to bleepity bleep, and then
you bleeped what you wanted to bleep.
Yeah, exactly.
I'll actually bleep that out in the audio version so that
okay, cool, great.
I'll bleep out your bleep.
And then so idealistic from that, or like miraculous, would be like we have the ability to live forever. Like we've developed the technology. We can shift between bodies. So we moved into cyborgs and robotic bodies. It's accessible to everyone. We're able to easily overcome the problems with energy that would actually allow for space migration. So we're moving into space. I'm going past the Earth. Anyone can do this. Anyone can stay here. There's enough room. We've learned to harvest the sun's energy and the wind's energy to a degree where we have energy abundance. And because we're in robotic bodies, then we don't have to worry about food problems, which is the actual major problem with sustainability and resilience today. If all of our food is straight energy, then we don't have to worry about that as much. People aren't replicating themselves. They've decided consciously to be like, no, I'm good with myself, and if I want to make a new self, I'll just make a copy of myself, and I'll put it off into this virtual world, and we can timeshare this robotic body or something like that. Anyway,
I like it. It's a very
how's that for miraculous? Like, how does that sound?
It sounds like, it does sound pretty miraculous, and I'm sure that there's some people, there's the whole thing about how one person's paradise would be somebody else's dystopia, so I'm sure that there's some, from a primitivist kind of conservative perspective.
I want to back up. My miraculous also, it's like big enough for all. So all the meat puppets, all the guys that want to stay in their like little meat bodies and live around campfires and stuff, they got it. They can have it. We got little like reservations.
Reservations, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
That's like a trope in science fiction, in certain science fiction stories and stuff. It's like the unaugmented humans live in these cordoned off little areas, where they don't have to. I mean, are there going to be like, Amish people in 30 years when we have
Hell yeah, there's going to be
technology?
And they're going to hate us. They're going to call us the Earthlings or something. Because what do the Amish call us today? They call us the English.
The English.
Yeah, so they'll call us the Earthlings because I don't know. I don't know why exactly. Just
because they live on the moon.
The English.
It's the Amish are going to colonize Mars first. That seems clear to me.
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess another part of it is that I mean, this is definitely past 30 years. I'm really being miraculous here to say it would happen in 30 years. But
Shoot,
like
go for it.
but like virtual worlds that your mind upload could interact in would be so lush that it would also deal with population problems because most people wouldn't want to play in this very limited physical world. They'd be more interested in playing in the virtual world than these lush, way more modifiable, way more like I don't know, just way more everything, I suppose. Be able to see in 13 dimensions instead of 3 dimensions, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Anyway,
You know,
there you
I
go.
there was some. I was out the other day on the U of Washington campus up here in Seattle, and I was doing some writing in public, sitting around, by myself, and these Latter-day Saints missionary guys came up to me, you know, and I was like, "Oh, are you guys gonna tell me about the good word? That's cool." Like, but I was asking them about if they thought, if they ever thought about radical life extension, and I started
Yeah,
trying to sell them on the idea that,
yeah,
you could really, and I asked them if that would be compatible, with their faith, or because some people feel like it's, incompatible with faith. But then I was also telling them that the fastest growing transhumanist organization out there today, I
yeah.
think, is the world, or it's the Mormon Transhumanist Association. So, and don't they have something in the sort of the metaphysics of the afterlife there, that every believer gets their own kind of like
Planet, I
their
think.
own, yeah.
I think they get their own planet.
So it seems like the Mormon Transhumanist Association could actually use technology to actualize this
Yeah, but
metaphysical
you're not supposed
proposition.
to give heaven on earth, right? Like, what are you selling people on if you can actually, like, if you can sell heaven on earth?
You're selling
Like,
them
if
heaven, man. That's
every heathen can have it, why are we going? Why are you going to buy into the Mormon religion?
Well, those are definitely important questions for traditional ideologies of humanity as we faced our post-human future. We
I
could
actually have
very
a question.
much.
Do you know about the Mormonist views on life extension, being that they are such a big transhumanist section?
I'm not particularly sure exactly, although I thought that I might have seen some kind of sort of this notion that it's almost like part of being fruitful or something. It's like living, like, we're supposed to be healthy.
Hmm.
Like we're
Yeah,
supposed to. That's more like our divine nature. You
yeah,
know, that's more true to our
yeah,
divine nature. We're not just these frail, you
yeah.
know, finite beings.
So it's that sort of like idea that God has made us to live up to our potential, our
Yes,
highest
and
potential, something like that.
I think beyond just the Mormon Transhumanist Association, I think that's there is a wing. There's contingents of transhumanists who are religious in various. I'm sure that every world faith is represented.
The
In
Scordian transhumanists.
yeah, and weird, joke religion, subculture parody religion, transhumanists.
So what is your miraculous slash what you would like to see scenario?
Well, I guess I liked your vision a lot. It was kind of like Star Trek with cyborgs and
Virtual reality. You
and
can't forget the
yeah,
virtual
and
reality.
right, it was Star Trek with mind uploading, basically.
Yeah, yeah.
They don't really talk about mind uploading that much in Star Trek, so
Yeah,
who
that's
knows?
true. That's interesting. Maybe we should redo Star Trek.
Yeah, Star Trek where we all live in a video game.
Yeah.
So I don't really, I think my concerns are about the social questions,
Yeah, me too.
and so to me, the really transformative scenario is like that we end like these coercive, social institutions that put a dollar amount, ahead of a person's right to exist from various ways, So
or not only a right to exist, but a right to like thrive or exist well, or
right, not just to exist, but to exist with dignity, to thrive in dignity,
Exactly.
And so I feel like those are really the questions, and the longevity thing is kind of just like a lark to me. Like, I'm not really too concerned about it. I'm much more worried about boosting the bottom end of the life expectancy kind of question. I think and that's where I think we'll actually see the gains to be made. Because if you really look at what the source of longevity originally is, looking at public health awareness, that and then in the 19th century, like antibiotics and stuff, like really led to your first big longevity gain of so many years, and then once you moved into the 20th century, we started having a lot more advances in dealing with the diseases of old age, and so then we're extending the lifespan on that end to some extent, and seeing people living longer than we've ever recorded before. Although you can look at the historical, the sort of the folk knowledge systems of various cultures that have recorded people who live much longer, but
700 years.
In terms of actually what we've documented, people are living longer since we've been documenting it. So I really see that bringing those advancements to the parts of the world where they're not present yet is the thing that I think we should be concerned with the most over the next the near term, and then when we'll be in a better position to evaluate the role that that radical life extension can take in our lives. And I'm not really so sure that I'm sold on like the whole concept of mind uploading as being something that will be feasible like this century. So I've had some friends who kind of do work around the brain, and I think that the brain work kind of stuff it's still, to me personally, it's still an open philosophical question if it will ever even become possible. But if it should, then I don't anticipate it. So for probably until after my lifespan.
I think a lot of it's going to depend on next month's episode a little bit. Like it depends on how much AI progresses. I think if we get radical, strong AI within our lifespan, then that will change a lot of the research and a lot of whether or not we can get mind uploading and stuff like that.
Right. Yeah. And
but that's an open question too. So.
Yeah, exactly. And you guys like if we were going to talk about that more, there was Noam Chomsky was being interviewed on this guy Singularity one-on-one podcast, I think it's called, and the guy talks about transhumanist stuff with anyone who he can find who's like an expert in these fields or whatever. But he was asking Chomsky about what he thought about the singularity and AI and stuff, and he says it's just science fiction. He's like, the best AI today is still pretty much like using similar approaches that we were doing when I was doing machine translation problems in the 1960s or whatever. It's just now there's more computing power behind it, I think was his take. But he might not be as plugged in.
Yeah, I love Chomsky on his ideas about social policy and his take on like geopolitics. His ideas about social media and the internet and a lot of technological advances I've been not as sold on. He seems to be not as informed.
Right, he's sort of conservative in some of those ways, and I think that in the linguistics field, a lot of people feel that way about him too. That he's is like, stick to the politics, Chomsky, or whatever. But I would love to get him in a room with Marvin Minsky and and have them go at it with Ray Kurzweil moderating the discussion or something. But and I want to talk about that whole subject more. I want to research it a lot more and talk about it next month.
Yeah, totally.
So, gosh, I'm trying to think about what else. What else did we try to?
Well, I wanted to just reflect something you were saying that I think is important. Like a lot of longevity or lifespan increases in the developed world. God, I really hate those terms. I wish we could use
Yeah,
something other than develop and developing, but for lack of better word, the
exactly.
developed world were increases in life expectancy of earlier of
Reducing child mortality.
reducing child mortality more than actually expanding life expectancy. Because a lot of the statistics are based on averages, like average lifespan, and then so yeah, and it would be nice to get. I mean, this might not be miraculous as much as it is where what's actually happening in a lot of places. It's like optimistic slash status quo, where we're bringing better medical technologies to, or not medical technologies, but medical care,
Yeah.
basic medical care, um, so, to the developing world, so that you're reducing child mortality or bringing right reducing, that would be the right way to say it.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So in a certain, I'm really I'm glad you bring that up. That's why I'm talking about that now.
Absolutely. I mean, if you look at it today, it's like I think the statistics say it's something like 99% of all child mortality happens in like the poorest countries in the world.
Yeah, and it's gross. It's like stuff that could be prevented for pennies,
Right.
like
That's
deworming medicines and things like that. It's
right. And that's my big takeaway from the whole issue is that it's sort of it would be kind of the worst of all worlds if there were, a rich elite of people who could live to be hundreds of years old while there's still people dying from, not from getting diarrhea.
yeah, exactly. So I guess a big part of your miraculous scenario is getting basic health care first
Yeah.
before we start focusing on extending our life indefinitely.
Right. And the longevity activist argument to that is that we should be able to do both of these things at the same
I
time.
agree
You
with
know?
that.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with that. I think that's certainly compelling. But it's sort of so to me, it's like it's about like what initiatives we're funding because
Yeah.
there's always this question of limited resources and that you're
And
already
it's,
seeing.
it's not only a limited funding resource, it's a limited attention resource. Like,
Cognitive load.
yeah, are you like I completely respect your ideas that we should be looking at both, but if what you're providing is so shiny that it outshines real issues other places that we're already not looking at because it's difficult for us to look at because we have all this like first world guilt, then I don't know how I just how do you deal with, not how do I, but as someone promoting like Aubrey de Grey and his Sins Institute, how do you deal with that? Maybe you make it a sideline to say we make that part of your agenda, is that we're not just promoting Western like elite um, growth, but we're actually part of our agenda as our institute is actually promoting like child mortality rates going down, something like
Yeah, and I think that in a lot of ways, a lot of these transhumanist-oriented orgs uh, they see that stuff as kind of like mission creep. It's like
yeah,
a little bit outside of their scope. Like, if what we're trying to do is develop new technologies, it's outside of our focus to worry about problems that are already technologically solved, frankly.
yeah.
Like, I've actually heard people make that argument, which I think seems very callous to me, and
Yeah.
I feel like
Well,
there's
they are
an
technologically
empathy.
solved.
Right, but
So if the question is if they're technologically solved, then why aren't the solutions being distributed, or whatever you want to call that? Why aren't they ubiquitous?
yeah,
So to me, that
absolutely.
means they're not actually solved.
Well, right, but it's not strictly speaking a technological issue, per
Yeah,
se.
well, I
It's
guess
more
that's
of a
kind of what I'm
cultural
trying to.
or a political issue,
Yeah,
and in a lot of ways, I feel like a lot of these sort of people want to think of technology as being neutral, as being
yeah,
politically neutral, and in the sense that it's just a tool, you can say, sure, of course, it's what about what you do with it, But there are biases in technological development. The way that technology is developed, it reflects the values of its creators.
That's true. And Douglas Rushkoff wrote that book. What was the name of the book? He was
Present
talking
Shock?
about. Say it again.
Present Shock?
No.
That's his latest one.
It
Life
was
Incorporated?
Between Present Shock and Life Incorporated.
Program or be programmed.
Yeah, program and be programmed. Yeah. And it talks about how a lot of the techno-utopian ideas that when they're presenting it is that technology is unbiased, but he's like, that's just patently not true. Like, if you develop a gun and you develop an alarm clock, they have different biases in them. You're more likely to kill someone with a gun than an alarm clock.
Depending on how you feel in the morning.
Yeah. Exactly.
That reminds me of, there's a great bit, and to go back to Futurama again, where there's like Dr. Farnsworth or something, he's saying, Amy, technology isn't good or evil, it's all in what you do with it, like the death ray.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I like Matt Growing. How do you say his last name? Growing?
Matt Groening?
I don't know. The guy who made The Simpsons and Futurama.
Yeah, yeah.
And recently,
I always thought that the Futurama
his news thing, which is, I think, great. This is a little bit off topic, but Silicon Valley, that comedy.
No, that's Matt Judge.
Oh, that's
Mike Judge. Mike Judge.
Excuse me.
I want to start watching that because I'm into broadly satirizing.
In my mind, it's pretty good critique.
I'm into that. I want to get down with that. And Douglas Rushkoff put out something in his email list or whatever about how he thought that since Mike Judge was satirized, just as he satirized like the corporate world and Office Space or whatever, that it's perhaps that the tech industry has reached a kind of a cultural bubble that has burst enough to the point where it can be publicly made fun of now, or something like that. And so I want to check it out. And I'm glad that you're kind of straying off topic, because really, it's as long as you've got time to keep going, we can just talk about whatever at this point, because I think we really kind of hit most of the points I wanted to hit.
Yeah, I think we did too.
You can read my article about it at thefakefuture.com about immortality, and I kind of get into the nitty-gritty of a lot of the stuff.
Put that in the link of the...
Yeah, I'm going to have a show notes kind of thing, attached to this stuff after I finish it up and do a little bit of work on it. But if there's anything else you wanted to, kick around the old can, I'm all about it. As long as you've got time.
I have time. We have a watcher now, I think.
Apparently we have 4 viewers is what I see, and I think it counts 2 of us.
Hello, everyone. Hello to 2 other people. I don't know. I mean, I feel like I cut you off a little bit. Because what I feel like when you were putting forth your, I guess, miraculous scenario, I mean, maybe it's miraculous to you, but to me it sounded more like status quo or like optimistic. Like, I really want to know what's miraculous to you. That's what I want to know.
You think it's not miraculous enough that I just want everyone in the world to have water or something?
Yeah, because I think we're moving. I mean, from my perspective, we're moving towards that.
I think so. I think it's a doable goal, like over the next 20 to 35 years.
Yeah, so that's not miraculous. Miraculous is outside of doable.
Well,
if I want Star Trek with virtual reality.
I don't know. I'm really. I guess I'm so cynical that I really feel like it would be a big deal to just have water for everyone in the world. Like,
all right, we'll
have cool cybernated farming systems that are distributed locally and producing all these kinds of traditional crops and stuff for people's life ways, and we're preserving languages and cultures and not making things go extinct, and we're pulling all the plastic out of the ocean, and creating ways to get more energy from the sun, like with our beaming it down from our weird moon base or whatever, and we're colonizing Mars maybe for fun, just so Elon Musk can ride a hyperloop around Mars and drive his Teslas on Mars and stuff and retire
What do
there.
you think about boundaries, like
National boundaries?
yeah, national boundaries in
I
that
think that
miraculous scenario?
in a miraculous world, we would have this sort of like, in my miraculous future, we have like this anarchist utopia where everything is organized through like federated, cyber tribes that are all these voluntary kind of spaces that people can migrate around through and try to find the ideal community for them in the world, and there's freedom of mobility and free access to communication, and everybody has access to an abundance or a post-scarcity of technologically driven, production of resources that is put to work for everyone, and it's communal.
So all the robots are slaves, and providing all the humans are all the
my idea is
pre-sentient robots are slaves.
Yeah, it's like, why should we create robots that can feel pain and feel suffering and feel like they're being exploited? Like, we should just not create conscious robots that we want to exploit. If we're going to create conscious robots, we should give them rights and let them be free and let them work alongside us as like our cosmic brothers or whatever in this.
What about sisters? Are all robots brothers, or do we have any robot sisters out there?
Well, there's also the explosion of traditional gender boundaries and as a social construct. I mean, there's some multiplicitous approaches to gender fluidity and stuff is going to be a larger factor in the future of human civilization. But it's how the rest of the world reacts to that in traditional sectors of governments and cultures and religions and stuff. Like, those are going to be problems too, and I want to do a whole episode about that too.
So it's kind of like, I hear you saying, like, kind of like an anarchist, libertarian, socialist utopia that's underpinned by an actual distributed abundance production of needs and wants, something like that.
Yeah, I guess, and it's sort of.
Get down with that. So you are into zeitgeist, then, I see.
Well, I wouldn't, I don't. The problem is how we get there. You see, and it's a utopian thing for me. It's like, I'm willing to say that, the most I could just try to actually work on achievable goals is really important to me. Because those are the things how we get there. Like, we're not going to get there by just saying, oh, well, if everyone just adopted this resource-based economy. It's like, I don't understand how, and no disrespect to the people who are active proponents of the Zeitgeist movement or the Venus Project and the resource-based economy concept, but I don't really see how they intend to wrest power away from the capitalist, the oppressor or whatever.
Yeah, that's one of the biggest issues I feel they suffer from, is why I then distanced myself from it. They don't have I do like the idea of presenting a kind of an ideal world, but it kind of like, if your ideal world is 30, 40 years off and all you're doing is presenting that, and you're not giving any sort of steps to go towards that or change the current power system so it's more equitable and accessible to everyone, then it becomes insular to a certain degree and boring to a certain degree, because we're just sitting around talking to each other about this awesome future that will happen someday. Okay, now what?
I feel the same way, and it's always kind of, then I feel like it's important to talk about the problems that are roadblocks to that, to us getting to some kind of better future, and talk about the problems we face now. And then when you bring those things up and you say, well, what should we do about this? And then the answer is, well, we need a resource-based economy. And it's sort of this circular logic that we don't get right away.
Or the most I've ever gotten actually is a little bit, well, we need to promote more. It's always this marketing thing. Like, we need to market it more.
Well, some of the cool stuff that can come out of that is that people who are trying to make model communities and stuff like that. You know,
Yeah.
like model communities are a great idea. I'd love to see more
What's the difference
experimentation.
between model communities and seasteading?
Well, you know, seasteading happens on the ocean. You know, so
So it's a model community on the ocean.
yeah, you build a model of a community that floats, and then you try to live on it. But that's the other thing with the longevity movement too. You know, it's like it's basically the problem for the longevity movement right now is that there isn't enough funding for it. So the problem is that, you know, we could see a lot more progress in these areas if there was more funding, but for there to be more funding, there has to be more public support. So essentially, the movement is at this area where it's, you know, the goal is to like increase public support and awareness of their issues and try to get it out there, and that's why you see some political parties like the Longevity Party, which formed in Moscow by Marina. I forget what her last name is with the K.
Yeah, with the K.
But you know, I saw her at a conference in San Francisco that I went to for, it was called Transhuman Visions in February, and Aubrey de Grey was there as well, and you know, I've seen Aubrey de Grey talk twice. I saw him talk at this event called Extreme Futurist Fest that was organized by one Rachel Haywire, who put it on in around the 2012 day. There was one in 2011 as well, but I saw Aubrey de Grey talk there in Los Angeles in 2012. For the first time I saw him speak, he gave a really great presentation about one of the biomedical approaches that they have to like targeting some of the effects of, I think, something about stuff that causes heart disease, and it was kind of like a scientific. You know, he was giving you some scientific details about how one of these therapies might work, you know, from some research that they'd funded. And that was really interesting. It captivated my imagination, you know, to think about the scientific kind of angle of it. But the second time that I saw him speak this year at the Transhuman Visions conference I went to in San Francisco in February, his whole presentation was about how SENS needs more funding and how can we work on our messaging, you know. And it was like a lot less inspirational to see a guy pitch for his organization about how to give his stump speech about how they need more money, you know. Like, personally, I would have been more moved by you know, seeing some of the more of the research side of it, because that stuff is actually interesting to me, even though I'm a lay person. I'm not like a scientist or whatever, you know. So that's the longevity people. They want to get public support so they can get the funding, but I feel like there's going to be a wing of people who aren't just the bioconservatives of traditional, you know, groups that don't like the certain, you know, directions of technology, or the environmentalists who are, you know, maybe the deep ecology primitivist kind of people who are against techno-civilization and techno-progress on that front. But, you know, there's going to be wings of people who think, well, this longevity stuff is kind of selfish. It's kind of narcissistic. It's, you know, and like you were saying, if they don't make it part of their mission to deal with the solvable mortality challenges that already exist, then to me, I see that as an empathy gap.
Yeah.
There's going to be a public perception of an empathy gap that will bottleneck research because there won't be enough funding for it. There's only so many, you know, baby boomer financiers of tech companies, you know, Gen X CEOs who have money to dump into this stuff, you know?
Yeah, I mean, you just gave me an idea, too, because even if it is mission creep, because, I mean, a lot of these organizations probably are fairly fringe and don't have, their resources are already strained, so adding on early life extension, for lack of better words, to their mission is probably beyond their scope, and I think I can understand that. The question then, though, would be strategic partnerships. Like, if you're not going to make this part of your core mission, at least say that it's part of your values, and that you're partnering with other organizations who are focusing their core mission on this.
Yeah. Well, to SEN's credit and stuff, I mean, they at least, you know, in the mission statements that they have, it's like, we want to see, you know, they're like, we're dedicated to making sure that life extension becomes available as quickly as possible to as many as possible, or something to that effect. It's like there's this populist tone of that it should be egalitarian in its access and its accessibility. This is for most of these groups, I'm pretty sure that's built into their.
Well, I think that's good, and I think that to make it more than just PR requires connecting out. Either making it like it's one thing to say something, it's another thing to take action on it. And if you're dedicated to that, then again, I think that you should either make it part of your core mission, or you should partner with other people that it's part of their mission. And in another sense, there's a lot of work being done by big organizations focused on those early life extension problems, those problems of, like, for example, the Global Fund to Fight Malaria, AIDS, and Tuberculosis, right? Huge group doing lots of work in that area.
Yeah, I mean, that would be good. That would be also good PR for them if they could sort of, I don't know how they could ideologically at least team up with them. They certainly wouldn't want to, divert too much of their own budgets, to such efforts, because their whole existence is predicated on having those budgets,
Yeah.
But it's a tough question, and I think it's okay if research is mostly fringe funded by the ultra elitely wealthy people for now.
I think so too. Until it becomes something that's big.
Until it becomes more viable. But I definitely think whether or not it actually plays out, it's because of those demographic trends of an aging world population getting older and wealth skewing older. There's going to be a market for it, and there's already people writing about how biotech startups are set for billions and billions more dollars of every year. It's increasingly becoming a larger market, and a lot of them are oriented toward these anti-aging questions. It's this idea that we could come up with like a youth pill, a fountain of youth pill, is really captivating to a lot of these organizations. And whether or not it actually ends up yielding any beneficial research, there's going to be people hawking supplements and all kinds of stuff for this growing market.
Oil market.
What's that?
Big snake oil market.
Yeah, absolutely. There's still going to be 21st century snake oil, and
I mean, that brings me up to we touched on this earlier, the idea of people like if one of the pessimistic scenarios or disastrous scenarios where folk growing older and like ideology stagnating or political movement stagnating because all there is this older generation who has all the power. I think that even if the ideology changes, the fact that that's interesting. That wealth skews older. Well, if populations continue to grow older, then I assume that wealth will continue to skew older. And so even if their ideologies change over time, there will still be wealth behind or power behind their ideologies, whether or not it's changed or stagnating, which could be problematic either way. And then so that brings up like a regulation sort of question. Maybe we'll have to start thinking about laws that say after a certain, like, taxes start becoming age-based taxes instead of wealth-based taxes. As you get older, your taxes get larger or something like that.
Like if you're able to continue to be economically viable citizen of the dystopian one world government where then they can tax
or if you started doing like if you started taking like anti-aging measures then every anti-aging measure you take requires you to or maybe maybe a purchase tax even, sort of like you have like cigarette taxes and stuff like that. You get.
Yeah, I mean, I guess something like that might become necessary in some sense if the questions of anti-aging become socially destructive in some way.
Yeah,
you know.
that's.
But the other thing about that I think I've seen addressed in some cases is when people talk about the Max Planck thing about how science progresses one funeral at a time,
Yeah,
or
that's
how you have to wait
correct.
for your critics to die and stuff. As
Yeah.
some people have said, well, at least in science, like that's an easy question. Just say you have to retire after a certain age. You know, just say you're not allowed to be a scientist anymore after
Oh yeah, that's actually.
150.
Or maybe you have to move into a different field or something like that.
I mean, yeah, it could very well play a role in the lives of our great-grandchildren.
Yeah.
Or figurative great-grandchildren that we'll have together.
I'm not having any great-grandchildren, unless they're with you, Lance.
They might have to deal with it, but I don't think we're going to have to. I'm not sure, though. I could be wrong.
I'm still not planning on dying. I'm not planning on it. It might happen, but I'm not planning on it. That's what I told. I think I was telling you earlier. I told my girlfriend when I first met her. I was like, but when I was like more into this stuff, like 5 or 6 years ago, I told her, yeah, I'm not planning on dying, and she kind of freaked out a little bit, like not like crazy or anything, but just like, what do you mean you're not planning on dying? Death is natural, and I ended up like accusing her of being like a death cultist and
deathism they call it.
And it's just it's funny to look back on yourself and see how ridiculous that you are sometimes. Like at this point in my life, I'm like, yeah, if I could live longer, it'd be great, but if not, I think I'm okay with dying. Like, and it doesn't feel like a death cult thing. It feels more like I'm just gotten older, and I feel satisfied, and for some reason, being more satisfied in my life right now makes death more easy to acknowledge and be okay with. It's interesting.
Yeah, well, and your views could evolve on that issue as in the future yet still again. I mean,
sure.
You might say, when I was young, I wanted to live forever, and then, as I went into my middle age...
Are you saying I'm middle-aged?
No, not at all. You're still young. You're just like me. I don't know exactly where but I'm an old millennial. Okay? I'm not a young Gen Xer. I'm an old millennial.
I mean, young, old... Wait, how old are you? Let's let the audience know how old we are.
I'm 31.
Oh, I'm 36 or 37. So.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't know how much older you were.
Everyone thinks I'm all like youngsty and stuff. It's probably because I'm going to be one of those like punk rock guys that you see that think they're like real young still, and they're like have their hair spiked, but they got the plumber crack. That's going to be me. But I'm going to be the raver version of that. That's what's going to happen.
Rainbow goth.
Yeah. Or like the lady at the bar that you see that has the big floofy blonde hair, bright red lipstick, but she's like 80. That's going to be Zach. Talking about life extension.
Well, if you could get a robot body in the future, would you try being an 80-year-old lady for a while, or?
If I could be a robot in the future, would I be an 80-year-old lady? Yeah, sure. I think that's a good idea.
I mean, you might as well.
Honestly,
if you could live forever, you might as well try everything out. I mean.
Have you read Ian Banks, sci-fi novelist?
You gave me one of his books, and I haven't read it yet.
Yeah, read that stuff. He talks about a lot of my current future thoughts, or like my current futurist ideas, come from him, because he takes the social dimension into play in a lot of ways. A lot of other futurists, except for maybe some of the cyberpunk futurists, such as William Gibson and whatnot, take into account, and he talks about getting to a point in which that we can control our biology through like meditative techniques and whatnot that we were given at birth, like genetically, or like supplemented really early on, and so or maybe even taught. Maybe like part education, part genetics,
Augmentation.
and part augmentation, but the ability to like meditate and change your sex, like, and things like that.
Does he
So
talk
that,
about that in the book that you gave me?
which book did I give you?
Um, Transition.
I don't think so.
Not in that one. That one's not
Not
as
in that
strictly,
one.
not as much of a
But see
sci-fi.
that, these type of things he brings up, they're not ever brought up as like foreground parts of the plot. They're
Right.
more like background parts of the world he's in. So that it might be referred to there.
World building.
I think it's an interesting idea. Like I wouldn't want to remain a male heterosexual, relatively heterosexual person for the rest of my existence into longevity. Like that sounds kind of boring. I want to know what it like. I want to know what it's like to be receptive.
I can dig it. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, you have a whole. If you have the whole course of your life, I mean, if you have a radically extended lifespan, then certainly there's, why would you even want to resemble your original self, however you defined that at whatever point anyway, you know what I mean? It's
Yeah, totally.
over time you would just want to keep changing, and that's one
And
of
how
the
much are you going to remember too? That's another question I've had. I can't remember
right.
when I'm like, I can remember back to like 4. Like what happens after 1,000 years? Are we even the same person given the way our memories work? I don't know about that either. It's also interesting to me.
Yeah, those are some various part of the philosophical kind of arguments that are leveled at the people promoting the immortality kind of angle. It's like one of the broader categories of those arguments is kind of like, will we change into something that we no longer resemble humans in general? And that's like, obviously for transhumanists, that's not a big deal, right? Like,
Yeah.
You're ready to jettison the human condition, But for a lot of other people, they have a sentimental attachment to it. Those people that fall into what they call the deathists,
Yeah. One other thing along that line, hormonal changes, right? Like
Menopause.
menopause are just reaching my 30s, like we're talking about sexual type stuff. But like as I've gotten older and my hormones have changed, I'm just not as interested in that anymore. So
We're getting really personal here on the fake future tonight.
whatever. It's personal and general at the same time because we're not transhuman yet.
Right. Yeah. We all have to deal. We'll all have to deal with it.
But the question is like, if we stop aging at a certain age, does that stop development as well? Like one of the things that I feel that we
Like, would you just want to be 30 forever?
Yeah, is that even possible? Like one of the things I think that we don't look at very much in our society or global society even is human development past 18. Like once we're 18, we're supposed to be adults, and that's the end of it. And we don't look at like patterns of development across human adult lifespans. And with this sort of like longevity idea, like what does development look like? Like you're saying, do we want to be 30 forever? Is that even possible? Like, anyway.
If Art Levinson and Google Calico get their way, then yes, we will all be 30 forever in the fake future. I think that's.
But what does that look like? Like, does that mean that we look 30 forever? Does that mean our minds don't change, our feelings don't change?
That's a good question.
Our desires, our impulses don't change. Am I asking too many questions of you?
I think it would be. I think it's going to destroy human civilization as we know it. It's problematic. I mean, I'm not suggesting that people take up the cause of neo-Ludditism and anti-transhumanism and become radical, militant anti-transhumanists. Nothing of the sort. Although there might be some people that want to do that.
Yeah.
But, I like your concept of a world big enough for us all.
Yeah, that's how I like it.
And the question of, like,
how do we make that happen?
yeah, and how can we ensure that there won't be such a great power disparity,
Yeah.
or I mean, these are questions that we're dealing with today, just in general, with economics and in the medicine in particular. I mean, these are questions. So I think the important thing is that you continue watching my podcast every month.
Me and Lance are trying to be the next what? Who are we? Who is your
Who do I look up
celebrity
to?
personality that you're going to move into his boots as he doesn't die?
That's a
Or
good.
she, for that matter.
Yeah, I
Uh,
mean that's a good question. I uh, I like futurist guys like sci-fi authors like Bruce Sterling and William Gibson. Bruce Sterling particularly is like he's a well-noted futurist. He's well known for being a futurist. Not just a sci-fi author,
yeah,
but,
yeah.
but his sci-fi thought has contributed to futurism at large. And I also like some of these kinds of podcaster guys that talk about tech news and stuff. Like I see myself as being able to do something similar to some of these people that I like to follow. So
All
what
right.
about
I can
how
see that.
about
I can see you as
you?
the. I don't know. I was thinking maybe the Salvador Dali of the future.
I
Think
could
that'd
see
be
it.
nice. Maybe like a love child of Jim Morrison, Salvador Dali, and Robert Anton Wilson. I don't know.
All rolled into one.
All rolled into one.
I mean, well, you're
Is
on
that
my podcast, so I mean, you're halfway there. We just got to keep doing it. So.
all right? Anyway, I think we're not only meandering at this point, we're
Right.
just talking about nothing.
It's getting real. It's getting pretty inconclusive at this point. If
Yeah.
anything, I could take away from this whole discussion is that you know we have no idea what we're talking about, and the future remains a big question mark. But that's what it's for. It's about using our imagination, stretching out our imaginative capacity to look at future scenarios. And I hope that we can keep doing it soon in the future. And I hope you can come back again sometime, Zach.
Yeah, I hope you can come back again as well, Lance.
Well,
Um,
I'm going to watch this
I
over and
like
over
the
again.
big question mark. I think that we're trying to split that big question mark into lots of little question marks that are more knowable,
Yeah,
um, and or at least being able to decide which of those little question marks we want to see happen. What sort of challenges that are in the way of that sort of those question marks happening, and which ones are more likely and less likely, and and hopefully, from my understanding of what you're saying, and or what you said you want from this podcast, and why I'm kind of interested into it, is to bring these sort of ideas, at least if not to the public at large, to our public, to our little corner of people that might be interested in these things that, or maybe didn't know they were interested, but through us talking about them could find that they're not viable, but worth thinking about,
yeah,
important to them in their futures. Yeah.
yeah. For me, it's like there are people who are doing work out there that I admire. I hear people putting out these calls for a more critical view of technology and how progress is written to be happening at large. And so I hear people calling for us to engage with technology and the future, and I want to also add to that call. I want
Yeah.
to echo that call and
Yeah.
amplify it. And
Yeah. I was
and
thinking about sitting or doing some like public talks locally as well, just engaging people with these questions. And
I'd love to come down and do something with you sometime. You're not that far away from me.
yeah. On that last note, though, I'd like potentially, I mean, we haven't completely talked about what the next the next series of podcasts are going to be about, but it'd be nice to like maybe put some emphasis on our selection process being those of near future technologies that are currently impacting us and that we need to be talking about now because they matter.
You want this to be democratic, huh? Where you get a say in what the, what the
Whatever.
podcast
If you want to be a dictator, I
I'm the
don't care
dictator
either.
of
I'm
the
just saying.
future. Okay.
Huh?
The reason why I'm doing this podcast is so that I can gain power and get immortality before anyone else. I'll be the first and the last person to live forever. Okay. There will never be anyone else who will live as forever as I do.
That sounds great. As long as I could be
My co-host.
Your co-host. Then
No,
I'm fine
I mean,
with that.
well, I think the artificial intelligence is the big one that I want to talk about next, and then the third one I thought would be good to talk about is technological unemployment. You know?
That's good. I think that's real
I have some other issues. Yeah, no, I have some other topics that I think I showed you a list of before that we could kind of vote on it. Or I was hoping that there would be like eventually some kind of a small community of people that would respond to this stuff, and maybe they would want to have a say in what topics we discuss down the road. But I want to do 12 episodes over the year, you know, and by next June, I want to bookend the whole thing with the 12th episode will be about existential risks to humanity.
Ooh, that's fun.
So that's kind of a nice bookend to the series. What do you think?
Yeah, it's ended on that really dark note. I like that.
Well, and then if
sarcasm, by the way, in case you're going to
still around, then there will be a 13th episode, you know, and then we'll have to figure out what comes after that. But
so we're going to do the 2012 of 2014.
Well, it'll be 2015 by then.
Oh yeah, that's true. So I'm not going to be. I probably won't be able to be here next month because I'm going to go on a vacation, and I don't know how spotty my internet's going to be. But we should find you another co-host.
Well, I'm sure. I'll put out a call, and I hope it'll happen. But
all right,
I think that was a pretty good, nice talk about everything. I'm gonna eventually post this up at thefakefuture.com, and hope I'll put some show notes in there and stuff. And do you want people to be able to reach you at all in any particular way? I mean, you're out there on the Twitter and stuff. If there's anything you want to shout out or anything before we sign off.
Yeah, you can reach me. You can reach me at WWJIMD. What would Jim do? On Twitter. And then from that, inside my profile, you can find all my other social media profiles.
Fantastic. It's been really great talking with you. I really appreciate you taking the time to help me become the fake futurist, and I hope that we can do it again. Maybe we can come back and talk about technological unemployment in a couple months.
That sounds great. All right, we'll talk to you later.
All right, have a good night.
All right, bye.
See you, everybody. Thanks for tuning in.
Thanks for tuning in.